The Roman province of Britannia was officially created in 43 CE, and its first administrative center was established at Camulodunum, once the stronghold of the Trinovantes. That arrangement did not last long. During the uprising led by Boudicca, the city was devastated beyond recovery. Once Roman control had been restored, the provincial administration was transferred to Londinium, situated on the banks of the River Thames. In the centuries that followed, this growing city became the political heart of Roman Britain and was known to the later Britons of the sub-Roman era as Caer Lundine. Following the completion of Agricola's campaigns, the province was reorganized into a number of civitates, administrative territories that generally reflected the lands of the larger native tribes or tribal confederations. Each district possessed its own urban center that served as the seat of local government. The territory of the Atrebates was governed from Caliver, Atrebatum, present-day Silchester in Hampshire, remembered in later British tradition as Caer Telemion. The Belgae were administered from Venta Belgarum, modern Winchester, known as Caer Gintgich. The powerful Brigantes had their center at Isurium Brigantum, today's Aldborough in Yorkshire, called Caer Isurian. The lands of the Cantiaci contained two important administrative centers. One was Duravernum Cantiacorum, modern Canterbury, remembered as Caer Saint, while another was Durobrive Cantiacorum, corresponding to Rochester, later known as Caer Duabruf. Farther north, the Carvetti were administered from Luguvalium, today's Carlisle, which the Britons later called Caer Lugualid. The territory of the Catuvelauni centered on Verulamium, modern St. Albans, remembered as Caer Miniship. The Corieltavi governed their affairs from Ratae Corieltavarum, now Leicester, later known as Caer Lerion. The Cornovi maintained their capital at Viriconium, today's Wroxeter, remembered as Caer Guricon. In western Wales, the Demetai were centered on Moridunum, modern Carmarthen, known in later tradition as Caer Merdin. The Dobuni administered their lands from Corinium, modern Cirencester, remembered as Caer Ceri. The Dumnoni ruled from Isca, today's Exeter, later called Caer Uisc. The Durotriges possessed two important centers. One was Lendiniae, identified with Ilchester, known as Caer Lindinos, while the other was Durnovaria, modern Dorchester, remembered as Caer Durnac. The Iceni had their administrative capital at Venta Icanorum, present-day Caestor St. Edmund, later known as Caer Went. The Parisi governed from Petuaria, now Broughon Humber, remembered as Caer Petuar. The Regni controlled their territory from Noviomagus, modern Chichester, later called Caer Te. The Silures were administered from Venta Silurum, located near Caerwent and Chepstow, remembered as Caer Gwent. The Trinovantes, whose lands had once hosted the original provincial capital, later centered on Caesaramagus, today's Chelmsford, known as Caer Calma. Alongside these civic capitals, Rome established four important coloniae where retired legionaries settled after completing military service. These colonies enjoyed elevated legal status and became symbols of Roman authority throughout the province. The first was Colonia Claudia Victricensis, better known as Camulodunum, modern Colchester, remembered as Caer Colon. Another was Colonia Domitiana Lindensium, or Lindum Colonia, corresponding to present-day Lincoln, later known as Caer Lind Colon. In the west stood Colonia Nervia Glevensium, modern Gloucester, remembered as Caer Glui. Finally, northern Britain contained Colonia Eberracensis, centered on Eberacum, today's York, later called Caer Ebroc. Besides these administrative centers, many other Roman settlements grew into significant towns and military bases. Alauna, modern Alcester, became known as Caer Allen. Andertitum, today's Pevensey, was remembered as Caer Pensa or Coit Anderidos. Aquae Sulis, famous for its thermal springs and now known as Bath, later appeared as Caer Badan. The settlement of Blestium, corresponding to Monmouth, became known as Caer Gorthegirn. Caestor in Lincolnshire retained its Roman name, while Castra ad Alaunam developed into present-day Lancaster. Cataractonium, today's Cateric, was remembered as Caer Catarorc, and Canovium, modern Caerhun, later became Caer Conovian. Further east stood Danum, modern Doncaster, remembered as Caer Don. The great legionary fortress of Diva Victrix, today's Chester, became known in later Welsh tradition as Caer Legion. At the southeastern coast, Dubra, now Dover, survived as Caer Dower, while Durolin Ponte, corresponding to Cambridge, became Caer Grouth. The fortress of Isca Augusta, today's Caerleon, was remembered as Caer Legion Gwa Uisc. Letositum, near modern Wall in Staffordshire, became Caer Luit Coit, while Magnae Dobunorum, corresponding to Kenchester, later appeared as Caer Farwyd. Industrial and commercial settlements such as Mamucium, modern Manchester, were remembered as Caer Mongwyd, while Mediolanum, today's Whitchurch, became Caer Megwyd. Moridunum continued to flourish as Caer Merdin, and Portus Adumi, corresponding to Portsmouth, later appeared as Caer Portus. The fortified harbour of Rutupiae, modern Richborough, survived as Caer Ritus. Sagontium, today's Caernarfon, became Caer Segint, while Sorviodunum, the site of Old Sarum near Salisbury, was remembered as Caer Caratalk. Tamium, modern Cardiff, became Caer Taff. Vertis, today's Worcester, appeared as Caer Guragon. Verulamium retained its importance as Caer Minkip, while Venovia, corresponding to Binchester, became known as Caer Weir. After Septimius Severus defeated Clodius Albinus at the Battle of Lugdunum in 197 CE, he appointed Virius Lupus as governor of Britain and introduced an important administrative reform. Instead of a single province, Roman Britain was divided into Britannia Superior and Britannia Inferior, each ruled by its own legatus Augusti pro praetore. Britannia Superior retained Londinium as its capital, while Britannia Inferior was administered from Eboracum. A century later, in 297 CE, another major reorganization followed the collapse of the so-called Imperium Britannicum. Under Caesar Constantius Chlorus, the two existing provinces were replaced with four new ones, all belonging to the Diocese of Britannia, itself part of the Praetorian Prefecture of Gaul and supervised by a vicarius. The newly created provinces included Britannia Maxima Caesariensis, governed from Londinium, Britannia Prima, administered from Corinium, Britannia Secunda, with its capital at Eboracum, and Britannia Flavia Caesariensis, centered on Lindum. Only the governor of Britannia Maxima held the higher rank of consularis, while the governors of the remaining provinces served as presides. Britannia Maxima encompassed the prosperous southeastern regions. Britannia Prima covered much of western Britain, including northern Wales and the West Country. Britannia Flavia occupied the territory that would later become the Midlands and Mercia, whereas Britannia Secunda stretched across much of what later formed southern Northumbria below Hadrian's Wall. During this same reform, Londinium was officially renamed Augusta Britanniarum, reflecting its position as both the diocesan capital and the center of Britannia Maxima. Despite its official status, the new title never became widely accepted in everyday use. Civilian governors were now responsible solely for administrative and legal matters. Military authority had been completely separated from provincial government, a policy introduced throughout the empire rather than one unique to Britain. Military command within the Diocese of Britannia was organized into three independent commands. The Comes Maritimi Tractus supervised Legio Secunda Augusta, now stationed at Rutupiae, together with frontier troops numbering roughly 3,000 infantry and 600 cavalry. The Dux Britanniarum commanded Legio Sexta Victrix, based at Eboracum, along with approximately 14,000 infantry and 900 cavalry stationed across the northern frontier. The third command belonged to the Comes Britanniae, also known as the Comes Rei Militaris per Britannias, who controlled Legio Vicesima Valeria Victrix at Deva Victrix, supported by mobile field forces consisting of around 2,200 infantry and 200 cavalry. The Comes Maritimi Tractus, later known as the Comes Litoris Saxonici per Britannium, was responsible for defending both shores of the English Channel. His command also included the Classis Britannica, the Roman fleet operating from Dubry in Britain and Bononia across the Channel in Gaul. The administrative reforms of 297 extended far beyond Britain. In Gaul, the former provinces were reorganized into the Diocese of Galliae, containing Lugdunensis, 1, 2, 3, 4, Senonia, Belgica 1, Belgica 2, Germania 1, Germania 2, and Maxima Sequanorum, while the southern territories formed the Diocese of Viennensis, also called Septem Provinciae, which included Aquitania Prima, Secunda, Tertia Novem Populana, Narbonensis Prima, Narbonensis Secunda, Viennensis, Alpes Maritimae, and Alpes Poeninae et Graiae. The provinces of Hispania also underwent major restructuring. The earlier 3 provinces became 5: Hispania Tarraconensis, Hispania Galaetia, Hispania Lusitania, Hispania Baetica, and Hispania Carthaginensis. These provinces were then further divided into administrative districts known as conventi, functioning in a similar manner to the civitates elsewhere within the empire. Following the death of Constantine the Great in 337 CE, the Roman Empire was divided into 3 enormous praetorian prefectures, each containing several dioceses. The praetorian prefecture of the Gauls included Gaul, Viennensis, Britain, Hispania, Germania, and Tingitana. The praetorian prefecture of Italy, Illyricum, and Africa governed the Italian peninsula, the Balkans, and North Africa. The praetorian prefecture of the East administered Thrace, Anatolia, Syria-Palestine, Egypt, and Libya. Just as provincial and diocesan governors had lost military authority decades earlier, the praetorian prefects likewise exercised only civilian administrative power. Responsibility for the army rested entirely with separate military officials. This arrangement reflected the division of the empire among Constantine's surviving sons. Constantine II received the western territories centered on Gaul, Constans governed Italy, while Constantius II inherited the vast eastern provinces. Both Rome and Constantinople also possessed their own independent praetorian prefects, reflecting the exceptional status of the imperial capitals. Military command across the western provinces ultimately rested with the Magister Militum per Gallius, who in turn answered to the Magister Utriusque Militia, the supreme military commander serving the Western Emperor. In the aftermath of the Great Conspiracy of 367, Roman forces carried out a series of campaigns to restore order across northern Britain. During this period, Civilis, the vicarius of the British diocese, created an additional northern province known as Britannia Valentia. Its governor was granted the elevated rank of consularis, placing the province on the same administrative level as Britannia Prima. For many centuries, historians generally believed that Valentia occupied the territory between Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, a region sometimes described as Intermuros. According to this interpretation, its administrative center may have been located at Habitanicum, modern Risingham, in Northumberland, which stood along Dare Street. Another possibility was Luguvalium, the Roman settlement that developed into modern Carlisle. Since the closing decades of the 20th century, however, several alternative theories have been proposed. Some scholars have argued that Valentia may actually have been situated in Wales, with Diva, modern Chester, serving as its capital. Others have suggested that the province covered the lands of Cumberland and Westmoreland, with Luguvalium once again acting as its principal seat of government. The Notitia Dignitatum, compiled in its surviving form around 425, provides one of the most important descriptions of the political and military structure of late Roman Britain. Its British section also refers to 2 related military commands located in northern Gaul, both of which were connected to the defense of the Channel region. At the head of the Diocese of Britannia stood the Vicarius, whose complete title was Vices Agens Praefecti Praetorio Galliarum per Britannias. He acted as the representative of the Praetorian Prefect of Gaul and supervised the civil administration of the British provinces. The Vicarius was supported by a large and highly organized staff. The Princeps Officii served as chief of staff and supervised the wider administration. Beneath him was the chronicularis, who acted as the senior deputy. 2 numerarii were responsible for financial matters, including the collection and recording of taxes. The commentariensis maintained official reports, daily records, and administrative journals. The adiutor functioned as the principal assistant, while the ab actis kept legal proceedings and official acts in order. The cura epistolarum oversaw correspondence and managed incoming and outgoing letters. Below these senior officials were subadiuvi, who worked as deputy assistants, along with exceptores, lower-ranking clerks who copied and recorded documents. The singularis et reliquum officium included messengers, attendants, guards, and other junior personnel required for the operation of the vicarius's office. Beneath the diocesan administration were the governors of the individual provinces. Britannia Prima and Britannia Valentia were each governed by a consularis. Britannia Secunda, Britannia Flavia Caesariensis, and Britannia Maxima Caesariensis were administered by officials holding the lower rank of praeses. If the Nomina Omnium Provinciarum, written by Polemius Silvanus in 449, preserves an accurate record, the possible province known as Britannia Orcades may also have been governed by a praeses. Every provincial governor maintained a staff broadly similar in organization to that of the vicarius, although on a smaller scale. In addition to confirming the existence of 5 provinces within the British diocese, the Notitia Dignitatum records a detailed network of military commands and units. By the later Roman period, the size and structure of the army had changed considerably from the formations of earlier centuries. A numerus usually consisted of about 300 soldiers. A cohort contained approximately 480 men, while an ala was a specialized cavalry formation. The late Roman legion was also much smaller than its earlier imperial predecessor. Instead of numbering around 5,000 mostly infantry soldiers with attached cavalry, a late legion often contained only about 1,000 infantrymen. Many units continued to carry old regional, tribal, or functional names. Titles such as exploratorum, meaning scouts or reconnaissance troops, and vigilum, meaning watchmen or guards, had often become traditional by this period. They did not necessarily describe the true ethnic background, composition, or everyday duties of the soldiers who served in them. The Notitia does not list Roman forts in Valentia, assuming the province lay between the 2 northern walls, nor does it provide a full account of the garrisons in northern Wales. One possible explanation is that these regions had already been placed under praefecti gentilium. Such officials may have been local rulers, commanders of allied communities, or Roman officers responsible for semi-independent frontier groups. The highest military authority in Britain was the Comes Rei Militaris per Britannias, more commonly called the Comes Britanniae. He possessed overall responsibility for the defense of the diocese and directly commanded the Comitatus, the mobile field army intended to respond rapidly to invasions, rebellions, and major military emergencies. Among the infantry formations under his control were the Primani Juniores and the Secundani Juniores. Both units were probably formed from sections of Legio Secunda Adiutrix and were classified as Legiones Comitatenses, meaning heavy infantry belonging to the field army. The Victores Juniores Britannici were an Auxilia Palatina unit. They served as medium infantry and belonged to a prestigious category of troops normally associated with the central imperial field armies. The cavalry under the Comes Britannia included the Equites Cataphractarii Juniores, heavily armored horsemen intended for direct battlefield assaults. The Equites Stablesiani and the Equites Scutarii Aureliaci were also heavy cavalry formations, while the Equites Honoriani Seniores belonged to the Vexillationes Comitatenses, the mounted elements of the mobile army. 2 additional cavalry forces, the Equites Syries and Equites Typhali, were associated with foreign or federate traditions. The first had Syrian origins in name, while the second was connected with the Typhali, a people who had been incorporated into Roman military service. By the 5th century, however, the names of such units did not always reflect the true origin of their serving soldiers. Another major command belonged to the Comes Litoris Saxonici per Britannium, the Count of the Saxon Shore in Britain. He controlled the Limitanai, stationed along the northern coast of the Oceanus Britannicus and the eastern shoreline facing the Mare Frysicum. The most important legionary position under this command was held by the Praefectus of Legio Secunda Augusta at Rutupiae, modern Richborough in Kent. The Praefectus Classis Britannicae commanded the British fleet from Dewberry, modern Dover. At Athona, now Bradwell in Essex, the Praepositus Numeri Fortensium commanded the numerous Fortensium. At Dubris, another officer led the Milites Tungricani. Lemanis, modern Lympne in Kent, was occupied by the numerous Turnescensium. Farther north, Branodunum, modern Brancaster in Norfolk, was defended by the Equites Dalmatae Branodunenses. These were cavalrymen whose traditional title connected them to Dalmatia. At Gariononum, identified with Burgh Castle in Norfolk, the Equites Stablesiani Garianonenses formed another mounted garrison. Regulbium, modern Reculver in Kent, was held by the first cohort of the Baia Tarsi under a tribune. Anderidos, or Andertitum, modern Pevensey in Sussex, contained the numerous Abelcorum, and also served as a base for the Classis Anderideensis, a local naval force commanded by its own prefect. At Portus Adorni, modern Portchester in Hampshire, a unit of exploratories was stationed under a praepositus. These troops were associated with scouting, observation, and the early detection of hostile activity along the coast. The Dux Britanniarum commanded the frontier forces in Maxima Caesariensis and along the Vallum Aelium, better known as Hadrian's Wall. He may also have exercised authority in parts of Valentia and possibly in Britannia Secunda. At Eberacum, modern York, the prefect of Legio VI Victrix remained one of the most important commanders in northern Britain. Near Bridlington, at a place known simply as Presidium, the Equites Dalmatae was stationed. At Darnham, modern Doncaster, the Equites Crispiani formed the local cavalry force. Morbium, generally identified with Ilkley, was occupied by a unit of cataphract cavalry. Arbaea, modern South Shields, contained the numerous Barcariorum Tigrisiensium, whose title suggests an association with river boatmen or transport troops originally linked to the Tigris. At Dictum, identified with Old Winteringham in Lincolnshire, stood the numerous Nerviorum Dictensium. Concangis, modern Chester Street, was occupied by a numerous Vigilum, traditionally described as watchmen. Lavatres, modern Bowes in County Durham, contained a numerous Exploratorum. These troops may have carried out patrols and reconnaissance through the nearby roads, passes, and upland terrain. At Vertere, a modern Brough Castle in Westmoreland, a numerous Directorum was stationed. Their traditional name can be translated as guides, suggesting that the unit may once have assisted armies moving through difficult frontier territory. Barboniacum, modern Kirkby Thor, was held by the numerous Defensorum, or defenders. At Maglona, often identified with Old Carlisle, stood the numerous Silensium. Magis, now Drumburg in Cumberland, was occupied by the numerous Pacensium. Longovicium, modern Lanchester in County Durham, housed the numerous Longovicanorum. At Deventio, identified with Moulton in Yorkshire, the numerous Supervenientium Petuariensium was commanded by its own prefect. The forts along Hadrian's Wall and its western continuation remained under a dense chain of local commanders. Segedunum, modern Wallsend in Northumberland, was garrisoned by the 4th cohort of the Lingones under a tribune. At Ponce Aelius, present-day Newcastle, the 1st cohort of the Cornovi guarded the important river crossing. Condacum, modern Benwell, was occupied by the 1st Ala of the Asturians. At Vindobala, identified with Rudchester, the 1st cohort of the Frixagi served under a tribune. Onum, or Hunum, modern Halton Chesters, housed the Ala Sabiniana. Salernum, modern Chesters, was defended by the 2nd Ala of the Asturians. Broccolicia, now Caroburg, contained the 1st cohort of the Batavians. Vercovicium, better known as Hausersteds, was occupied by the 1st cohort of the Tungrians. Vindolanda, modern Chesterholm, was held by the 4th cohort of the Gauls. At Asica, today, Great Chesters, the 1st cohort of the Asturians remained in service. Magnus, identified with Carvoren, contained the second cohort of the Dalmatians. At Camboglana, modern Burdoswald, the first alien cohort of the Dacians guarded one of the strongest western positions on the wall. The Ala Petriana was stationed at Petrianae, possibly Stanwix or Ray in Cumberland, a site also associated with the name Oxylodonum. This cavalry unit had long been one of the most prestigious mounted formations in Britain. At Abalava, modern Berg by Sands, stood the numerous Mororum Aurelianorum, a force whose title preserved an old connection with Moorish troops recruited from North Africa. Congavata, possibly Kirkbride or Drumburg, was occupied by the second cohort of the Lingones. Axellodunum, perhaps located at Maryport or Netherby, and sometimes associated with Castra Exploratorum, contained the first cohort of the Hispanes. At Gabrosentum, possibly Workington or Moresby, the second cohort of the Thracians remained in position. Tunatellum, perhaps Bo'ness or a site near Calder Bridge, housed the first alien fleet cohort, a formation with naval traditions. Glanibanta, modern Ravenglass, contained the first cohort of the Morini. At Aliona, associated here with Lancaster and the name Calunium, the third cohort of the Nervi served under a tribune. Bremetenicum, modern Ribchester in Lancashire, was occupied by a cunus of Sarmatians. A cunus was a specialized cavalry formation, and the presence of Sarmatian troops in this area reflected the empire's long-standing practice of settling foreign military communities along vulnerable frontiers. At Olenacum, identified with Elslack in Yorkshire, the first Herculean ala was stationed. Virocidum, modern Bro by Bainbridge, contained the sixth cohort of the Nervii. Beyond the units recorded in the Notitia, several forts and defended settlements in Cambria, the region now known as Wales, remained occupied into the late 4th and early 5th centuries. In at least one or two cases, military or administrative activity may have continued into the middle of the 5th century. These sites may have fallen under the authority of the Dux Britanniarum. It is also possible that they belonged to another regional command omitted from the surviving version of the Notitia Dignitatum. Among the important late Roman centres in Wales was Saguntium near modern Caernarfon. Isca Augusta, modern Caerleon, remained another significant military and urban site. Deva, present-day Chester, continued to dominate the approaches between western Britain and the northern frontier. Sicunium, identified with Y. Geyer, may also have remained active. Mediolanum, probably Caerzus, occupied an important position in central Wales. Tamium, associated with Cardiff, guarded the southern coastal region. Venta Silurum, modern Caerwent, remained an important walled settlement. Farther east, Bravonium at Llantwadine in Herefordshire and Magnus at Kenchester also retained strategic importance. Viroconium Cornoviorum, modern Wroxeter, was one of the largest and most influential urban centres in western Britain. Even after the weakening of direct Roman control, it continued to play a major role in the political and economic life of the region. The Notitia Dignitatum also records two military commands on the continental side of the Channel within the Diocese of Gaul. These territories had formerly belonged to the broader authority of the Comes Maritimi Tractus. By the early 5th century, their commanders worked in coordination with the Comes Littoris Saxonici per Britannium. Despite this cooperation, they did not serve directly beneath the British commander and remained part of the separate military administration of northern Gaul. The kingdom later known as Venedotia, called Gwynedd in Middle Welsh and Gwynedd in modern Welsh, first emerged across the former lands of the Ordovices, while also incorporating the territory once occupied by the Gangani, an Irish people living on the Lynn Peninsula during the time of Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century. Unlike much of Roman Britain, northern Wales was never reorganized into civilian administrative districts. Instead, it remained under direct military authority throughout the Roman occupation. According to medieval Welsh tradition, the kingdom itself came into existence during the early or middle decades of the 5th century. Its legendary founder was Cwneda Wledig ap Edyn, a powerful war leader from Marnau, who journeyed south with several of his sons and a large following to establish a new realm in the northwestern corner of Britain. By the closing years of the 4th century, the Gangani had disappeared from the peninsula. Some traditions suggest that they returned to Ireland, while others believe they gradually merged with their relatives, the Detsiangli, who occupied the lands farther east. These peoples shared distant connections with the Konkani of Munster, who themselves had earlier migrated into Leinster. As the Gangani disappeared, another Irish group known as the Lagin settled in the region. Their arrival eventually gave the peninsula its enduring name, Lynn, and they may have originally been introduced as Roman Federate settlers entrusted with defending the frontier. At the beginning of its history, Gwynedd controlled territory roughly corresponding to modern Caernarfonshire, Merionethshire, and Anglesey. Over time, it expanded to include Denbighshire and Flintshire after absorbing the neighbouring kingdom of Rose. This growth was not permanent. The eastern districts beyond the River Conwy eventually fell under the expanding influence of the Mercians, causing Gwynedd to lose Rose, along with the region later known as Gwynedd is Conwy. Centuries afterward, when Mercia and Northumbria became increasingly occupied with Viking invasions, Gwynedd successfully recovered both territories. The Norman invasions of Wales dramatically reshaped political boundaries, yet the Welsh resurgence of 1136 transformed the balance once again. Following a successful revolt against Norman rule, Gwynedd annexed the heartland of Ceredigion, while the remaining territories of the former southern kingdom continued under the descendants of its traditional rulers in Dyfed and Ystrad Twy. Throughout its history, Gwynedd occasionally split into two political spheres separated by the River Conwy. The eastern portion became known as Gwynedd is Conwy, while the western lands were called Gwynedd uwch Conwy. Such divisions generally appeared during disputes over succession, or during periods when southern Welsh rulers gained greater influence. Like many medieval kingdoms, its borders continually shifted. By the end of the Middle Ages, Gwynedd had expanded into several districts previously belonging to Powys, while also retaining most of the former kingdom of Ceredigion, excluding Ystrad Twy. Beginning around the year 1200, the rulers of Gwynedd gradually emerged as the acknowledged princes of Wales, exercising authority far beyond their original homeland. Their independence endured until 1283, when the campaigns of Edward I finally brought the kingdom under English control. Interestingly, the title Prince ultimately derives from the Latin word princeps, originally used by Roman emperors, making it a title that historically implied authority greater than that of an ordinary king. The neighbouring kingdom of Rus developed within the former lands of the Detsiangli. Its territory covered most of what later became Denbighshire and Flintshire, excluding several frontier districts. During the late 8th century, it fell under Mercian domination, and its eastern cantref of Tegeingal, whose Welsh name preserved the memory of the Detsiangli, remained under Mercian authority until the late 12th century. Gwynedd eventually reconquered the region and incorporated it into its own expanding realm. Among the rulers of Rhos, the best remembered is Cwnoglasus, known in Welsh tradition as Sinlas Goch ap Owain. The 6th century writer Gildas harshly criticized him alongside 4 other British kings, famously describing him as the charioteer of the bear. Although the precise meaning of this title remains uncertain, it reflects both his prominence and the moral condemnation directed toward him by Gildas. In later medieval Wales, the lands once occupied by Rhos became known collectively as Perfedolad, meaning the Middle Country. Geographically, this region corresponded closely to what was later called Gwynedd is Conwy. Another of the great Welsh kingdoms was Powys, whose early traditions traced its foundation to the famous figure Gorthegern, better known as Vortigern. According to Welsh genealogies, he was succeeded by his son Categern, who died fighting beside his brother Vortimer during the Battle of Aylesford in 455. The earliest royal centre of Powys stood at Viraconium Cornoviorum, modern Wroxeter, one of the largest surviving Roman cities in western Britain. Remarkably, the city continued to flourish well into the Anglo-Saxon period before becoming the centre of the kingdom known as the Riotsensate. Long before that transformation, however, the ruling dynasty of Powys had already shifted its residence farther west to Mathrafal. Around 570, the eastern portion of the kingdom separated entirely to become the independent realm of Pengwern. Powys originally developed from the former Civitas Cornuviorum. During its early expansion, it spread across the upper Severn Valley, together with the surrounding uplands to both the north and south. During this formative period, the kingdom experienced two military expeditions led by Germanus of Auxerre, who had once served as a Roman general before becoming bishop. At its greatest territorial extent, Powys controlled an enormous area stretching across Cheshire, Shropshire, parts of Staffordshire, Herefordshire, Montgomeryshire, eastern Denbighshire, and Radnorshire. This made it by far the largest kingdom in sub-Roman Wales. The loss of Pengwern dramatically reduced its territory, leaving only the western districts under direct royal authority. Around the beginning of the 9th century, further fragmentation occurred when several smaller kingdoms emerged within the region known as Rhwng Gwy a Hafren, reducing Powys even further. A major turning point came in 855 when Rhodri Mawr, ruler of Gwynedd, claimed Powys following the death of Cyngen ap Cadell. Rhodri's claim was strengthened through his father Merfyn Ffraich, who had married Nestferch Cadell, linking the two dynasties. After Rhodri's death, each of his sons inherited one of his principal kingdoms. Later, Hywel Deda, already ruler of Dyfed, acquired Gwynedd and eventually took possession of Powys as well, after its rulers died during an unsuccessful uprising against the English. Another dramatic political shift occurred in 1063 when Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, together with his brother Tostig, Earl of Northumbria, installed Bleddyn ap Cynfyn as King of Powys, while also recognizing him and his brother Rhywallan as joint rulers of Gwynedd. Bleddyn's descendants continued to govern Powys through what became known as the House of Mathrafal. The death of Madog ap Maredudd in 1160 marked yet another period of division. His son Llywelyn was killed shortly afterward, and the kingdom was partitioned among several members of the royal family. Owain Brogyntin inherited the cantref of Penllyn, although Gwynedd soon annexed the district by force while allowing Owain to remain there as a subordinate ruler. Meanwhile, Owain ap Gruffydd established the Principality of Powys Seiliog, later known as Powys Wenwynwyn, south of the river Rhaiadr. To the north, Gruffydd ap Mardog created Powys Fadog, occupying much of eastern Denbighshire. Powys Fadog eventually fell to England in 1277, while Powys Wenwynwyn survived only until 1283 when Edward I completed the conquest of independent Wales. The Kingdom of Erting, known in modern Welsh as Erging, emerged around the former Roman centre of Arraconium, remembered by the Britons as Caer Aeron. Although often associated only with modern Archenfield, its territory was considerably larger. It separated from the neighbouring Kingdom of Gwent in 474, establishing itself as an independent realm before eventually reuniting with Gwent through a royal marriage in 650. This restored union lasted until the expanding Kingdom of Mercia absorbed the region during its western advance. West of the River Usk, another kingdom gradually emerged. This was Glywysing, named after its first ruler, Glywys ap Sola. Around 470, Glewys declared the western districts of Gwent independent, creating a kingdom that covered much of present-day Glamorgan. Following his death only a decade later, the realm fragmented into 4 smaller principalities. For roughly a century, these petty kingdoms survived independently until every ruling branch eventually disappeared, allowing the territory to return peacefully to Gwent, though probably retaining considerable local autonomy. Independence returned in 755 under Rhys ap Ithel, whose dynasty descended from the senior royal house at Caerwent. The capital stood at Caer Tiff, modern Cardiff, where an important Roman fort had once guarded the coastline. On 2 occasions, Glywysing reunited with Gwent, each time under rulers who adopted the broader title of Morgan Nadwyg, although these unions proved temporary. The name Morganwgi, or Gwlad Morgan, first appeared under Morgan hen ap Owain, who reunited Gwent and Glywysing in 942. The United Kingdom lasted until his death in 974. A second reunion followed between 1063 and 1074, after which rulers based in Cardiff continued using the title even when controlling only Glywysing itself. In time, the name Morgan W. Gee became permanently attached to that western kingdom. Norman expansion finally ended its independence in 1080 when Robert FitzHammon conquered the territory and transformed it into the Lordship of Glamorgan. Across the Irish Sea lay Inis Manau, the Isle of Man. Unlike much of Britain, the island was never conquered by Roman armies and retained its native Brittonic population throughout antiquity. Welsh tradition traced its royal family back to Antonius Donatus Gregorius, remembered as Andubuan Dainod, a descendant of Magnus Maximus through his grandson Tutugwal ap Idinet. The island changed hands repeatedly during the following centuries. Bayatan mac Cairil of the Dal Fiatach conquered it in 577, only for Iaddan mac Gabrain of Dal Riata to seize it 5 years later. In 626, Edwin of Deira extended Anglian influence across the island. During the 8th century, Elidir ap Sander relocated the exiled royal family of Argoegd from Powys to Man, creating the foundation for the later House of Manau. From this dynasty eventually emerged two of medieval Wales's most influential royal families, the House of Aberfraw in Gwynedd and the House of Dyneffer in Ceredigion. Viking attacks struck the island throughout the early 9th century. These raids may even have encouraged Merfyn Fraich to leave Man and establish himself in Gwynedd with his family, including his son Rhodri Mawr. In 849, Norse Gaelic settlers known as the Gall Gaedhil began arriving after the island became part of the Kingdom of the Isles under the authority of Dublin. Between 990 and 1079, the island belonged to the Jarldom of Orkney, before Godred Crovan established the independent Kingdom of Man and the Isles, making the island its political center. Farther south, the Kingdom of Caer Gloe emerged around 455, occupying the former territory of the Dobunni, with its capital at Glevum, modern Gloucester. Around 550, succession disputes divided the kingdom into 3 separate realms centered on Gloucester, Cirencester, and Bath. Their independence proved short-lived. In 577, the armies of the Gewissae crushed the 3 British kings at the Battle of Diorham, ending all 3 kingdoms and permanently severing the land connection between the Britons of southwestern Britain and those of the Old North. The largest surviving kingdom in southwestern Britain became Dumnonia, which developed naturally from the former Roman civitas Dumnoniorum. Its capital remained at Isca Dumnoniorum, later known as Caer Uisc, and today called Exeter. By the early 5th century, Dumnonia had absorbed the neighboring territories of the Durotriges, creating one of the most extensive Brittonic kingdoms of sub-Roman Britain. Its territory stretched across most of modern Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, Dorset, and perhaps parts of Wiltshire, though the last claim remains debated. The vast Selwood forest formed a formidable natural barrier between eastern and western Britain, making expansion difficult for the West Saxons while encouraging maritime connections across the Bristol Channel and the English Channel with Wales and Armorica. 2 remarkable centres dominated the kingdom during its golden age. The first was Cadbury Castle, transformed during the 5th century into the largest fortified stronghold in Britain. Massive defences, an enormous Great Hall, and imported Mediterranean pottery reveal both military strength and long-distance trade. Many historians have suggested that this impressive fortress inspired later traditions surrounding the legendary court of Arthur. The second was Tintagel, where archaeologists uncovered an extraordinary royal and commercial settlement beneath the medieval castle. Imported pottery and luxury goods from Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, Greece, and Asia Minor demonstrate that Dumnonia maintained extensive overseas trade. More than 100 buildings surrounded the royal complex, making it one of the richest post-Roman sites discovered anywhere in Britain. During the 7th century, the Gewissae, ancestors of the West Saxons, gradually pushed westward. Somerset fell first, followed by Dorset. Exeter itself was captured in 816, forcing the Brittonic rulers to retreat beyond the River Tamar. Cornwall remained under native rulers for centuries afterward, although it eventually became a client kingdom before finally passing under English authority after the Norman conquest. Across the Channel, the migration of Britons transformed Armorica into what later became known as Brittany. Beginning in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, waves of settlers crossed from Britain, some perhaps arriving as Roman military colonists, others fleeing the growing Anglo-Saxon advance. By the 6th century, contemporary writers already referred to the peninsula as Britannia Minor, while Celtic traditions remembered it simply as Letha. The western half of the peninsula contained the former Roman districts of the Curiosolites, Ossismi, and Veneti, while later treaties gradually expanded Brittany eastward to include the territories of the Redonis, Namnetes, and eventually Cotentin and Avranchin. Viking invasions later stripped away some of these gains, but Brittany nevertheless emerged as the strongest surviving Brittonic state on the European mainland, preserving its language and identity long after Roman authority had disappeared. Although the Stuart period is often viewed as a continuation of the previous kingdoms, it marked the beginning of a dramatically different chapter in the history of the British Isles. When Queen Elizabeth I of England died in 1603 without leaving an heir, the Tudor dynasty came to an end. The English crown then passed to the House of Stuart through James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. His claim rested on his descent from Margaret Tudor, the eldest daughter of King Henry VII, who had married James IV of Scotland generations earlier. This royal connection united the crowns of England and Scotland under a single monarch for the first time, even though the two kingdoms remained legally separate. James's mother, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, had lived one of the most dramatic lives in European history. Forced to abdicate her throne after being challenged by rebellious Scottish nobles in 1567, she escaped to England hoping to find protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Instead, she spent years under house arrest before becoming linked to conspiracies against the English Queen. Eventually, Elizabeth ordered her execution, ending Mary's life but not her family's claim to the English throne. Elizabeth deliberately avoided naming an official successor during her lifetime. As her health declined, her trusted Secretary of State, Robert Cecil, quietly maintained communication with James VI of Scotland to ensure that the transfer of power would occur peacefully. The moment Elizabeth died, James was immediately proclaimed the new king in London, allowing the succession to take place with remarkable stability. With James's accession, the House of Stuart replaced the House of Tudor as the ruling dynasty over most of the lands that had once formed Roman Britain. The Stuarts themselves traced their distant origins to Brittany, while the Tudors had Welsh roots, making this transition not only a political change, but also another chapter in the long and diverse history of dynasties that shaped Britain. Between 1603 and 1707, excluding the years of the Commonwealth and the interregnum between 1649 and 1660, 6 Stuart monarchs ruled England, Scotland, and Ireland. These rulers were James I and the Sixth, Charles I, Charles II, James II and the Seventh, Mary II, who ruled alongside the House of Orange, and finally, Queen Anne. Anne became the last sovereign to reign separately over both the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland before the two kingdoms were officially united. Throughout this period, Scotland continued to use the traditional royal title of King or Queen of Scots, rather than King or Queen of Scotland. This distinction remained in place until the Parliamentary Union permanently merged the two kingdoms. The birth of Great Britain. A major constitutional transformation arrived in 1707 when the English and Scottish Parliaments approved the Acts of Union. These agreements created the Kingdom of Great Britain, replacing the two independent kingdoms with a single political state. Queen Anne now ruled as Queen of Great Britain while continuing to hold the title of Queen of Ireland. Anne's death in 1714 brought another dynastic shift. Since she left no surviving children, the crown passed to George of Hanover, beginning a new royal line of German origin. From that moment onward, Britain entered a new era under the House of Hanover, whose descendants and later related royal houses would continue to occupy the British throne for centuries. The kingdom itself also continued to evolve. It existed first as the Kingdom of Great Britain and the Kingdom of Ireland between 1707 and 1800. Following another constitutional union, it became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland from 1801 until 1921. After the partition of Ireland, it assumed its modern name, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, a title that remains in use today. Long before kingdoms, castles, or even humanity itself, the foundations of Britain were being shaped by immense geological forces that transformed the surface of the Earth over hundreds of millions of years. Around 612 million years ago, the ancient Laurentian craton emerged above the primordial oceans, creating one of the oldest surviving landmasses on Earth. Tens of millions of years later, approximately 540 million years ago, the small continent known as Avalonia separated from the supercontinent Pannotia and began a slow geological journey across the ancient seas. By roughly 425 million years ago, Avalonia eventually collided with Laurentia. This massive collision gave birth to the islands that would one day become Great Britain and Ireland. Interestingly, the ancient geological boundary created during this event closely resembles later historical divisions. In Britain, it follows a line similar to Hadrian's Wall, while in Ireland, it roughly separates the northern provinces from the southern regions. Human history arrived much later. Nearly 950,000 years ago, members of the species Homo antecessor became the earliest known inhabitants of Britain. At this time, Britain was still connected to continental Europe by a broad land bridge that allowed animals and humans to move freely between the two regions. Around 700,000 years ago, populations of Homo erectus occupied these lands. They were followed approximately 500,000 years ago by Homo bodoensis, while Homo neanderthalensis eventually reached the islands around 210,000 years ago, becoming another chapter in the long story of human evolution across prehistoric Britain. By around 200 BC, Rome had already begun its long and determined campaign to dominate the Iberian Peninsula. What would eventually become one of the Republic's greatest military achievements was, at the time, a slow and difficult conquest that would continue for generations. The struggle for Hispania demanded enormous resources, countless campaigns, and constant resistance from the local peoples. At roughly the same time, another great power was reaching the height of its influence. Between about 200 BC and 46, the vast Hunnic Empire stretched across an astonishing area, extending from the distant forests of northern Siberia to the mountains of Tibet and Kashmir, and from the Pacific coastline all the way to the shores of the Caspian Sea. Eventually, however, this enormous empire collapsed after sustained pressure from the Han dynasty. Following Rome's victories over Carthage, the territories seized in Hispania were reorganized in 197 BC. The Republic divided its new possessions into two major provinces. Hispania Titterior covered the eastern regions, while Hispania Ulterior controlled the western and southwestern territories. This administrative division helped Rome manage its expanding frontier, although the region remained far from peaceful. Only a few years later, in 192 BC, Roman armies completed the conquest of the last independent areas of Gallia Cisalpina, finally securing northern Italy after decades of conflict with Celtic peoples. Peace remained elusive across Western Europe. Between 181 and 179 BC, Rome fought what became known as the First Celtiberian War. Roman forces from Hispania Ulterior and neighboring provinces confronted a powerful alliance made up of the Pelendones, Arevaci, Lusones, Titi, and Belli. None of these tribes intended to surrender their independence without resistance, making the campaign both difficult and costly. Conflict continued almost without interruption. From 155 to 139 BC, Rome became involved in the long Lusitanian War, battling fiercely independent warriors in western Hispania. Meanwhile, the Numantine War lasted from 154 to 133 BC, as the city of Numantia became a symbol of determined resistance against Roman expansion. During these same years, the Second Celtiberian War added further instability, demonstrating that the conquest of Hispania was far from complete. Rome's ambitions were not limited to the Iberian Peninsula. Between 149 and 146 BC, the Republic launched the Third Punic War, bringing its ancient rivalry with Carthage to a brutal conclusion. The once powerful Phoenician city was completely destroyed, leaving Rome as the unquestioned master of the Western Mediterranean. Not long afterward, internal unrest threatened the Republic itself. Between 135 and 132 BC, thousands of enslaved people rose in rebellion during the First Servile War. Led by Eunice, the revolt challenged Roman authority in Sicily before eventually being crushed by the Republic. Rome's attention soon shifted toward the lands north of the Alps. Beginning in 125 BC, military campaigns gradually drew the Republic deeper into southern Gaul, setting the stage for one of the greatest territorial expansions in Roman history. The immediate cause came when the Celto-Ligurian Saluvi launched repeated attacks against the prosperous Greek colony of Massalia. Unable to defend itself alone, Massalia appealed to its long-standing ally, Rome, for military assistance. The Senate responded by sending the experienced consul Marcus Fulvius Flaccus, whose forces defeated not only the Saluvii, but also several neighboring tribes, including the Ligurians and the Vacontii. Even after completing his official term, Flaccus remained in the region as proconsul to stabilize Rome's growing sphere of influence. 2 years later, in 123 BC, another experienced commander, Gaius Sextius Calvinus, continued these operations. After suppressing the remaining resistance, he captured and destroyed Ontremont, the capital of the Saluvii. Their ruler, King Tutomalius, narrowly escaped and sought refuge among the Allobroges. Calvinus also established the fortified settlement of Aquae Sextiae, creating a permanent Roman military presence that would later become one of southern Gaul's most important cities. In 122 BC, Rome dispatched Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus to protect the Aedui, loyal allies of the Republic who were under increasing pressure from neighboring tribes. Domitius also hoped to capture the fugitive Tutomalius. Although his official consulship ended, he remained in Gaul for another year to continue military operations. The following year brought decisive battles. At Vindalium, Domitius achieved a remarkable victory against the Allobroges, even employing Roman war elephants to overwhelm the enemy. Afterward, he attempted negotiations with Bituitus, the powerful king of the Arverni, whose influence extended across much of southern Gaul. Diplomacy failed, and war became inevitable. The conflict reached its climax at the Battle of the Isere River. Roman armies under Domitius, joined by the newly elected consul Quintus Fabius Maximus, decisively defeated the combined forces of the Allobroges, Arverni, and the remaining Saluvii. Their victory permanently transformed the political landscape of southern Gaul. Following this success, Rome formally organized the conquered territory into the province of Gallia Transalpina. Romans commonly referred to it as Provincia Nostra, while neighboring peoples simply called it Provincia Romana. Over time, this name evolved into the modern French region known as Provence. In later centuries, the province became more widely known as Gallia Narbonensis. Around 120 BC, Fabius Maximus succeeded Domitius as governor of the province, ensuring continuity in Roman administration. During this period, several of Gaul's strongest tribal confederations, including the Arverni, Aedui, Sequani, and Helvetii, gradually replaced traditional kings with aristocratic governments led by councils of noble families and powerful magistrates, reflecting an increasingly sophisticated political structure. While Rome strengthened its influence abroad, Irish tradition remembers this era as the beginning of the island's heroic age, a period celebrated in legend and epic tales that would shape Irish mythology for centuries. Back in Italy, Rome once again faced internal rebellion when Spartacus led the Third Servile War between 73 and 71 BC. Tens of thousands of enslaved people joined his uprising, creating one of the greatest threats the Republic had ever faced. Eventually, Marcus Licinius Crassus crushed the revolt, with additional support from Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. To discourage future rebellions, approximately 6,000 surviving prisoners were crucified along the Appian Way, creating one of the most infamous displays of Roman punishment. In 62 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar completed his year as praetor and Pontifex Maximus before being appointed governor of Hispania Ulteria. Burdened by enormous personal debts from his political career, Caesar immediately launched aggressive military campaigns that expanded Roman control across the remaining unconquered regions of the Iberian Peninsula. Only a year later, events in Gaul dramatically altered the future of Western Europe. A coalition involving the Helvetii, Sequani, and the Germanic Suebi inflicted a devastating defeat upon the Aedui at the Battle of Magetobriga. The Aedui responded by sending the respected druid Diviciacus to Rome in search of assistance. His diplomatic mission, together with the growing migration of the Helvetii, created the political crisis that would soon erupt into the Gallic Wars. The victorious Suebi, led by Ariovistus, remained in Gaul after the battle, demanding land as payment for their military support. Soon afterward, other Germanic groups, including the Harudes, crossed the Rhine and insisted upon receiving territory as well. Their growing presence alarmed both the Gallic tribes and Roman leaders. By 60 BC, Caesar had completed his Spanish campaigns and was proclaimed imperator by his victorious soldiers. Rather than continue his military command, he resigned in order to pursue the Roman consulship, setting the stage for his extraordinary political and military career. At roughly the same time, Dumnorix of the Aedui, Casticus of the Sequani, and Augetorix of the Helvetii secretly planned to dominate all of Gaul through a powerful political alliance. Their strategy depended upon relocating the Helvetii from modern Switzerland towards southwestern Gaul. Although the conspiracy was uncovered and collapsed, the Helvetii attempted the migration again 2 years later. That movement would ultimately provide Caesar with the justification he needed to launch one of history's most famous military campaigns. Between 58 and 51 BC, Julius Caesar and his trusted lieutenant Titus Labienus carried out the Gallic Wars. Their campaigns conquered nearly all of independent Gaul, while also crossing into Germania and launching Rome's first invasions of Britain. Although these victories greatly expanded Roman territory, Caesar also had a personal motivation. Military success offered enormous wealth and prestige, allowing him to eliminate the crushing debts accumulated during his political rise. When Caesar famously wrote that all Gaul is divided into 3 parts, he was referring only to the lands beyond direct Roman control: Gallia Celtica, Gallia Belgica, and Gallia Aquitania. The already established Roman provinces of Gallia Cisalpina and Gallia Transalpina were not included in this description. The Helvetii began their migration after burning their own settlements, hoping to escape increasing pressure from Germanic peoples. They first requested permission to pass peacefully through Roman territory, but Caesar firmly rejected their request. Forced to change direction, they marched north, only to be intercepted by Roman legions. Joined by the Boii and the Tulingi, they fought Caesar at the Battle of Bibracte. Despite their determination, the Helvetii suffered a decisive defeat. After several days of retreat, they surrendered, allowing Caesar to secure one of his first major victories in Gaul. Without delay, Caesar turned against Ariovistus and the Suebi, defeating them near the Vosges Mountains and driving the Germanic forces back across the Rhine. In 57 BC, Caesar launched another series of campaigns against the powerful Belgic Confederation. After capturing the stronghold of the Suessiones, several neighboring tribes quickly surrendered. Yet the campaign nearly ended in disaster during the Battle of the Sabis, where the Nervi, Atrebates, and Viromandui almost overwhelmed the Roman army. Caesar eventually regained control of the battlefield and transformed what had seemed like defeat into another significant victory. With the Belgic tribes subdued, he continued westward, gradually bringing the Atlantic coastal peoples under Roman authority. In 56 BCE, Caesar continued his conquest of Gaul by launching several military operations at once. Instead of concentrating all of his strength in one location, he divided his experienced commanders across different regions, allowing Rome to strike multiple enemies simultaneously. Caesar personally marched into Armorica, where the Veneti had become the most powerful people along the Atlantic coast. Their strength did not come from large armies, but from their impressive fleet and complete mastery of the sea. Their ships were larger, stronger, and better suited to the rough coastal waters than anything the Romans had encountered before. For much of the campaign, the Veneti seemed to hold the advantage, forcing Caesar to rethink his strategy. Rather than attempting to defeat them only on land, he built a new fleet and prepared for a naval battle. When the two forces finally met in the waters of Morbihan, Roman determination and clever tactics overcame the Veneti's superior sailing experience. Once their fleet was destroyed, organized resistance quickly collapsed and Rome secured control of the Armorican coast. At the same time, Publius Crassus campaigned successfully in Aquitania, defeating the Sotietes, Vocates, and Tarasates, while Quintus Titurius Sabinus marched through the region corresponding to modern Normandy, compelling the Lexovi, Coriosolites, and Venelli to surrender. By the end of the year, Roman authority had expanded dramatically across Western Gaul. The following campaign season began with one of the most controversial actions of Caesar's career. During the winter of 55 BCE, Roman forces launched a devastating attack against the Usipetes and Tencteri after diplomatic negotiations collapsed. The assault spared almost no one, as warriors, civilians, elderly people, women, and children all became victims of the violence. Even back in Rome, many senators believed Caesar had gone too far and openly argued that once his command expired, he should face trial for his actions. Caesar ignored the criticism and continued to pursue even greater ambitions. Wanting to demonstrate Roman power beyond its traditional borders, he ordered the construction of a massive wooden bridge across the Rhine River. His army crossed into Germania, remaining there for just over 2 weeks, while conducting operations designed to intimidate the Germanic tribes rather than occupy their lands permanently. Shortly afterward, he undertook another remarkable expedition by crossing the English Channel with a relatively small force. This first journey to Britain was limited in scale and served mainly as a reconnaissance mission, but it represented the first direct Roman contact with the island and laid the foundation for future invasions. During this same period, Ireland remained untouched by Roman expansion. According to early Irish tradition, the island was divided into 5 major provincial kingdoms known collectively as the Coiseda: Midhe, Ulaid, Ol Nechtmakta, Laigin, and Mumhan. Each maintained its own rulers, customs, and political rivalries, creating a landscape very different from the increasingly centralized Roman world. In 54 BCE, Caesar returned to Britain with a much larger army. This expedition aimed not simply to explore the island, but to force its rulers into accepting Roman dominance. The strongest opposition came from Cassivellaunus, leader of the Catuvellauni, who united numerous tribes against the invaders. Although resistance was fierce, Caesar gradually gained the upper hand. Instead of directly annexing the conquered territories, he strengthened Mandubrasius of the Trinovantes by restoring him as a client ruler loyal to Rome, while forcing the Catuvellauni to acknowledge Roman supremacy and pay tribute. Events in Gaul soon demanded Caesar's immediate attention. Indutiomarus of the Treveri encouraged widespread rebellion among the Belgic tribes, working closely with Ambiorix, the charismatic leader of the Eburones. The uprising produced one of Rome's greatest disasters during the Gallic Wars, when Ambiorix completely destroyed the force commanded by Quintus Titurius Sabinus and Lucius Aurunculeius Cotta at Atuatuca. An entire legion, together with supporting cohorts, was wiped out. Rome reacted swiftly, raising replacement troops almost immediately, while Caesar launched a relentless campaign of revenge. By the following year, the Eburones had effectively disappeared as an organized people, their settlements destroyed, and their lands devastated. Ambiorix himself escaped across the Rhine, while several Belgic leaders fled to Britain, hoping to avoid Roman retaliation. Not long afterward, Gaul experienced its final and greatest attempt to regain independence. Vercingetorix emerged as the first leader capable of bringing together many rival Celtic tribes under a single command. His leadership transformed scattered resistance into a coordinated struggle against Rome. Major battles followed across the country, including fighting near Lutetia and the famous confrontation at Gergovia, where Caesar suffered one of the rare defeats of his military career. Despite these setbacks, the decisive moment came at Alesia. There, Caesar surrounded Vercingetorix with enormous defensive fortifications, while simultaneously preparing to repel relief armies attempting to break the siege. Roman engineering, discipline, and endurance eventually proved stronger than Gallic determination. With no hope of escape, Vercingetorix surrendered, bringing organized resistance to an end. Following this victory, Rome completed the incorporation of most of independent Gaul into the new province known as Gallia Comata. One important leader, Commius of the Atrebates, managed to escape across the Channel, where he established himself as ruler of an Atrebatian kingdom in Britain. The final campaigns of 51 and 50 BCE consisted mainly of eliminating isolated pockets of resistance. By then, Roman authority over Gaul was effectively secure. Caesar's extraordinary military success, however, soon created political turmoil in Rome itself. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River, knowingly violating Roman law and triggering a civil war that would reshape the ancient world. His supporters, known as the Populares, fought against Pompey and the conservative Optimates. Throughout the conflict, Caesar won victory after victory, and the Senate repeatedly granted him the office of dictator. By 44 BCE, Caesar accepted the unprecedented position of dictator for life. Many senators feared that the Republic itself was coming to an end, and a conspiracy soon formed among aristocrats who believed assassination was the only way to preserve Rome's traditional system. On the Ides of March, Caesar was murdered inside the Senate House by the group that called itself the Liberators. His death brought neither stability nor peace. Instead, Rome entered another period of conflict. Power passed into the hands of the Second Triumvirate, composed of Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Together, they defeated Caesar's assassins before internal rivalries slowly tore their alliance apart. Lepidus gradually lost almost all influence, leaving Octavian in control of the western provinces, while Antony dominated the eastern Mediterranean alongside Cleopatra, the seventh of Egypt. Their partnership eventually collapsed into open war. Between 32 and 30 BCE, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra, bringing Egypt under Roman rule and removing his final rival. Even while these struggles unfolded, Rome continued expanding elsewhere. German-supported revolts broke out among the Treveri and Morini, while the long Cantabrian Wars finally completed the conquest of Hispania. The fierce resistance of the Cantabri, Astures, and Galaeci forced Rome to commit enormous military resources before victory was finally achieved in 19 BCE. In 27 BCE, the Roman world entered a completely new era. The Senate granted Octavian the honorific title Augustus, and although republican institutions technically survived, real political power became concentrated in his hands. The Roman Republic effectively transformed into the Roman Empire, beginning the period known as the Principate. Over the following centuries, especially during the Pax Romana, the empire experienced remarkable peace, stability, and prosperity. Rome itself grew into one of the largest cities on Earth, with roughly 1 million inhabitants. Administrative reforms soon followed. The enormous territory of Gaul was reorganized into several provinces, while Gallia Transalpina became officially known as Gallia Narbonensis. In Britain, Tincomarus inherited the kingdom of the Atrebates and maintained close diplomatic ties with Rome. Augustus also completed the conquest of Hispania and established Augusta Treverorum, modern Trier, as one of the empire's most important administrative centers. Around the beginning of the 1st century CE, Irish tradition remembers Concobar mac Nessa ruling Ulster from Emain Macha, with the legendary hero Cu Chulainn serving as his greatest champion. Their principal rivals included Ailill and Queen Medb of Connaught, whose conflicts became central to Irish heroic legend. Elsewhere on the island, regional peoples such as the Fir Domnan, Osrag, Fir Mumhan, Fir Ol Nechtmachta, and the Ulaid dominated different parts of Ireland. On the continent, Rome suffered one of its greatest military disasters in 9 CE when the army of Publius Quinctilius Varus was ambushed and destroyed in the Teutoburg forest by Arminius and a coalition of Germanic tribes. The defeat shocked the empire so deeply that the legionary numbers 17, 18, and 19 were permanently retired. By 10 CE, Cunobelinus had become the dominant ruler of southeastern Britain, controlling both the Catuvellauni and the Trinovantes. Roman writers regarded him as the foremost king in Britain. Later, Christian tradition also claimed that Joseph of Arimathea reached Glastonbury during this period, although these accounts belong more to legend than firmly established history. Around 40 CE, Caratacus, son of Cunobelinus, overthrew Verica and absorbed the kingdom of the Atrebates into his expanding realm. Verica escaped to Rome seeking assistance, giving Emperor Claudius the political justification he needed to launch an invasion of Britain. Preparations began almost immediately. Claudius established the powerful Classis Britannica fleet at Gesoriacum, ensuring that the Roman army could safely cross the English Channel. In 43 CE, Aulus Plautius led 4 experienced legions into Britain under imperial authority. Roman forces defeated Togodumnus and Caratacus at the Battle of the Medway, while the Dobuni surrendered without prolonged resistance. Camulodunum became the first provincial capital, and Roman administration quickly took shape. Caratacus escaped into western Britain, where he continued organizing resistance among the Silures. Verica regained his throne briefly before being succeeded by Tiberius Claudius Cogidubnus, another loyal client king who governed on Rome's behalf. During these early years, Roman control steadily expanded across southeastern Britain as more tribes accepted imperial authority. In 44 CE, the future Emperor Vespasian campaigned throughout the southwest, conquering large areas and establishing an important military base at Isca Dumnoniorum. At the same time, Legio IX Hispana advanced northward, securing territory between the Humber and the Severn. According to later Christian traditions, Simon the Zealot also visited Britain during this period. By 45 CE, Roman engineers had begun constructing the Fosse Way, one of the first great military roads in Britain. Stretching from Exeter to Lincoln and linking important settlements such as Bath, Cirencester, Leicester, and Ilchester, the road became a vital artery for moving soldiers, supplies, merchants, and officials across the growing province, helping Rome tighten its control over newly conquered Britain. Beyond the frontiers of Rome, the Western Hunnic Empire continued to dominate vast stretches of the Eurasian steppe, while the Roman administration in Britain focused on roads, fortifications, political control, and the gradual expansion of provincial authority. Between 47 and 48 CE, Roman engineers constructed Watling Street, one of the most important roads in the province. Its southeastern branches began at the channel ports of Dubry, Rutupiae, Lemanis, and Regulbium, before joining the main route that passed through Londinium and Verulamium on its way to Verconium Cornoviorum. In later generations, the road was pushed even farther north, beyond Hadrian's Wall and into southern Caledonia, eventually reaching Blatobulgium in what is now Dumfriesshire. More than a simple road, Watling Street became a vital instrument of conquest. Soldiers, officials, merchants, messengers, and supplies could now move quickly across Britain, allowing Rome to respond to unrest and strengthen its hold over distant communities. In 47 CE, Publius Ostorius Scapula arrived as the new governor of Britannia and was immediately confronted by resistance. The Iceni rose against Roman authority, but Ostorius defeated them and placed Prasutagus on the throne as a ruler friendly to Rome. By supporting a cooperative king instead of governing the territory directly, Rome hoped to maintain peace while avoiding the cost of a permanent military occupation. This arrangement appeared stable for a time, but it would later contribute to one of the most destructive rebellions in British history. The following year, Ostorius turned his attention toward the Deci Angli in northern Wales. Their resistance was strengthened by the Silures, who were led by the experienced and determined Caratacus. The campaign was interrupted, however, when news arrived of a Brigantian uprising in the east. Ostorius was forced to abandon his immediate plans and move rapidly against the rebels, whom he successfully defeated. These events demonstrated the difficulty of governing Roman Britain. A governor could rarely concentrate on one enemy for long before another crisis erupted elsewhere. In 49 CE, Ostorius strengthened Roman rule through the creation of new settlements. At Camulodunum, the former royal center of the Trinovantes, he established the veteran colony known as Colonia Claudia Victricensis. Retired Roman soldiers settled there, transforming the city into a major symbol of imperial power and Roman culture. At Verulamium, modern St. Albans, he created a municipium, granting the settlement a privileged civic status and encouraging the growth of local administration, commerce, and Romanized urban life. By 50 CE, The long resistance led by Caratacus and his brother Togodumnus was reaching its final stage. Ostorius pursued Caratacus into the territory of the Ordovices, where the British leader prepared for a decisive battle. Caratacus had resisted Rome for years, moving from one tribal region to another and inspiring continued opposition. His forces were finally defeated, but he managed to escape once again, preserving his freedom for a short time longer. In 51 CE, Caratacus sought protection from Cartimandua, the influential queen of the Brigantes. Instead of offering him sanctuary, she placed him in chains and handed him over to the Romans. He was transported to Rome, where he was expected to appear in a triumphal display before execution. Before sentence could be carried out, however, he was permitted to speak before the Senate. His dignity, courage, and powerful words made such a strong impression that the Romans spared his life. Rather than being executed, Caratacus was allowed to remain in Rome, where he spent the rest of his years. His speech, later recorded by Tacitus, turned a defeated enemy into one of the most memorable figures of the conquest. Ostorius continued campaigning against the Silures, but in 52 CE, he died unexpectedly from natural causes. His replacement, Aulus Didius Gallus, arrived under direct instructions from Emperor Claudius to preserve the territory Rome already controlled rather than pursue further expansion. During the interval between Ostorius's death and Gallus's arrival, Roman forces suffered a serious setback. A legion commanded by Gaius Manlius Valens, possibly Legio II Augusta or Legio XX Valeria Victrix, was defeated by the Silures. The incident showed that Roman control remained fragile, especially in the difficult western regions. In 57 CE, another crisis erupted among the Brigantes. Venutius, the husband of Queen Cartimandua, rebelled first against his wife and then against the Roman power supporting her. What began as a personal and dynastic struggle soon became a broader anti-Roman uprising. The rebellion was eventually crushed by Caesius Nasica and Legio IX Hispana before Gallus left office. His successor, Quintus Veranius, arrived the same year and immediately launched operations against the Silures. His command proved brief, however, because he died before the end of the year. In 58 CE, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus became governor of Britannia. An experienced and aggressive commander, he pursued a policy of direct military pressure against the remaining centers of resistance. By 60 CE, he had led his army to the island of Mona, modern Anglesey, one of the most important religious centers in Britain. Roman writers describe the island as a stronghold of druids, sacred groves, and religious teaching. Paulinus ordered the destruction of these sanctuaries in an effort to eliminate the spiritual and cultural influence that he believed encouraged resistance against Rome. While the governor and much of the army were occupied far to the west, a far greater disaster began in the east. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, launched a massive revolt against Roman rule. According to Tacitus, the rebellion began after the death of her husband Prasutagus. His will attempted to protect the kingdom by leaving it jointly to his daughters and the Roman emperor, but Roman officials ignored the arrangement. The Iceni lands were seized, Boudica was publicly flogged, and her daughters were assaulted. These acts of humiliation and violence transformed local anger into a widespread uprising. The revolt quickly attracted other peoples who had suffered under Roman taxation, land seizure, and abuse. Camulodunum, the great Roman colony built on former Trinovantian territory, became the first target. The city was poorly defended and was quickly overwhelmed. Legio Nona Hispana, commanded by Quintus Petilius Cerialis, attempted to march to its relief, but the legion was ambushed and defeated before it could save the settlement. The infantry was largely destroyed, although Cerialis escaped with the cavalry. After taking Camulodunum, the rebels destroyed it completely. They then advanced toward Londinium. Suetonius Paulinus reached the city but recognized that he lacked sufficient forces to defend it. He made the harsh decision to abandon Londinium, allowing only those able to travel with the army to escape. The city was then captured and burned. Verulamium suffered the same fate soon afterward. Roman accounts claimed that around 50,000 colonists and inhabitants were killed during the destruction of the three settlements, though ancient numerical estimates are often difficult to verify. The scale of the uprising shocked the Roman world. Emperor Nero reportedly considered abandoning Britain entirely. Catus Decianus, the procurator whose greed and harsh policies were blamed for worsening the crisis, fled across the Channel to Gaul. He was replaced by Gaius Julius Alpinus Classicianus, who was expected to restore order and rebuild trust after the rebellion. In 61 CE, the revolt reached its decisive moment. Suetonius gathered the forces available to him and chose a narrow battlefield somewhere along the route later associated with Watling Street. His position protected the Roman flanks and prevented Boudicca's much larger army from surrounding him. The Britons arrived in overwhelming numbers, confident that victory was near. Their families watched from wagons placed behind the army, unintentionally blocking the line of retreat. The Roman soldiers remained disciplined as the Britons charged. They released their javelins, advanced in tightly ordered formations, and gradually broke the rebel lines. Once the British army began to collapse, the wagons behind it turned retreat into disaster. Boudicca's forces were annihilated, and the rebellion came to a violent end. According to later tradition, Boudica either took poison or died from illness soon after the defeat. Camulodunum was rebuilt, but it did not regain its earlier position as the administrative center of the province. The capital was transferred to Londinium, whose location on the Thames made it far better suited for trade, transport, and government. Nero also removed Paulinus from office and appointed Publius Petronius Turpilianus, a governor expected to follow a more conciliatory policy. Rome now understood that military victory alone would not be enough to secure the province. A later Christian legend claims that Simon the Zealot had arrived in Britain shortly before these events and was crucified at Caistor in Lincolnshire in 61 CE. Other traditions place his death in Armenia, Beirut, Abkhazia, Samaria, Caucasian Iberia, or Persia, while some accounts claim he died peacefully. These conflicting stories reveal more about the spread of medieval religious traditions than about firmly established events. In 63 CE, Nero appointed Marcus Trebellius Maximus as governor. Unlike many of his predecessors, Trebellius had no major military background and was known primarily as a civilian administrator. His appointment reflected Rome's desire to stabilize the province through negotiation, government, and economic recovery, rather than constant expansion. By 66 CE, Legio XXth Valeria Victrix had occupied Verconium Cornoviorum, modern Wroxeter, turning it into an important military base in western Britain. The following year, Legio XIV Gemina was recalled to the continent in preparation for a planned invasion of Parthia. The invasion never occurred, but the legion remained outside Britain because the province appeared sufficiently secure. That sense of stability, however, proved misleading. Roman soldiers grew dissatisfied, mutinies broke out, and a bitter dispute developed between Governor Trebellius and Marcus Rossius Coelius, commander of Legio XXth. The political chaos of 69 CE, remembered as the year of the four emperors, brought the crisis to its peak. Coelius forced Trebellius out of the province, and the legionary commanders temporarily assumed control. Coelius also sent part of Legio XXth to support the imperial ambitions of Aulus Vitellius. Britannia, like many other parts of the empire, became entangled in the struggle for the throne. Vitellius appointed Marcus Vettius Bolanus as the new governor. Bolanus arrived in Britain with Legio XIV Gemina, only to discover that Venutius had once again risen against Cartimandua. Taking advantage of Roman weakness, he challenged both the queen and her imperial supporters. Roman forces managed to rescue Cartimandua, but they could not restore her authority. Venutius took control and became king of the Brigantes. By the end of the year, Vespasian, who had once commanded Legio II Augusta during the original conquest of Britain, emerged victorious in the civil war and became emperor. His accession marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty and introduced a renewed period of military expansion in Britannia. In 70 CE, rebellion also spread across the Rhine frontier. The Batavian revolt in Germania Inferior was joined by the Treveri under Julius Classicus and the Lingones under Julius Sabinus. Legio XIV. Gemina was transferred back to the Rhine to help restore Roman control, leaving Britain to be reinforced by other units. In 71 CE, Vespasian appointed Quintus Petilius Cerialis as governor of Britannia. Cerialis arrived with Legio II Adiutrix and brought Gnaeus Julius Agricola to command Legio Vicesima Valeria Victrix. Agricola quickly began campaigning against the Brigantes, whose lands covered a vast area of northern Britain. At the same time, Legio IX Hispana constructed a permanent fortress at Eboracum, modern York. This base would grow into one of the most important Roman centers in Britain. In 74 CE, Legio II Adiutrix began building the great fortress of Deva Victrix, modern Chester. Its strategic position allowed Roman forces to control routes into Wales, the Irish Sea, and the northwestern regions. That same year, Sextus Julius Frontinus became governor and turned his attention toward the difficult western tribes. Legio II Augusta had already occupied several bases since the beginning of the invasion, including Alcester, Wadden Hill, Isca Dumnoniorum, and Glavum. By 75 CE, it established its permanent headquarters at Isca Augusta, modern Caerleon. From there, the legion could maintain pressure on the remaining resistant peoples of southern Wales. In 76 CE, Frontinus finally completed the subjugation of the Silures. Their resistance had lasted for decades, surviving the defeat and capture of Caraticus and inflicting repeated losses on Roman armies. Their final submission represented one of the greatest achievements of Frontinus's governorship. Agricola returned to Britain as governor in 77 CE and immediately faced a new emergency. The Ordovices of northern Wales had almost completely destroyed a Roman cavalry unit stationed in their territory. Agricola responded rapidly, launching a campaign that defeated the Ordovices and led to the second and final Roman conquest of Anglesey. By 78 CE, the island had been fully subdued. Tacitus later claimed that the Ordovices were nearly exterminated, although the continued presence of numerous forts in their lands suggests that many survived and that long-term occupation was still necessary. Between 79 and 81 CE, Roman soldiers constructed the route now known as Dare Street. Beginning at the fortress of Eboracum, it crossed northern Britain and continued through the region near Edinburgh before eventually reaching the legionary base at Inchtuthil. In later years, the road was connected to the eastern end of the Antonine Wall. Parts of it remained in use throughout the medieval period, and the section between Melrose and Edinburgh became known in Scotland as the Royal Way. Like Watling Street and the Fosse Way, Dare Street was more than a route of travel. It was a permanent military corridor that allowed Roman power to penetrate deep into the north. In 79 CE, Agricola defeated the Brigantes and began preparing for a full invasion of Caledonia. The following year, he led Roman forces farther north, first attacking and subduing the Selgovae. To secure their territory, he constructed a chain of approximately 12 forts. The army then advanced as far as the River Tay, moving into regions never before held permanently by Rome. Agricola also secured the loyalty of the Votadini, who became a client kingdom and helped protect the Roman frontier. When the army returned south in 81 CE, the Romans had already built forts from the Tay downward and consolidated much of the newly won land. According to Irish legend, this same year saw the Battle of Tara. In that tradition, Agricola sent a unit of Roman auxiliaries to Ireland in support of the deposed ruler Tuathal Techtmar, who had sought Roman assistance in recovering his throne. The story is not confirmed by Roman sources, but it reflects later memories of contact between Britain and Ireland during the Roman period. In 82 CE, Agricola resumed the northern campaign. His army marched along the eastern and northern coasts while the Classis Britannica followed offshore, keeping the land forces supplied and demonstrating Roman naval strength. The expedition reached the Moray Firth, pushing Roman influence deep into northern Caledonia. During these operations, Legio Vicesima Valeria Victrix began constructing a huge fortress at Inchtuthil. Agricola intended it to serve as the central military base for all Roman operations north of the Forth and Clyde. The fortress was planned on an enormous scale and may have been intended to become one of the largest legionary installations in the entire empire. From this position, Rome hoped to dominate the highland routes and connect the network of forts spreading across the north. The campaign also witnessed a dramatic mutiny. A cohort of Usipetes serving as auxiliaries rebelled, killed their officers, seized 3 ships, and attempted to sail back toward Germania. Their journey became a desperate struggle for survival. Some reached the lands of the Suebi, while others came ashore among the Frisians. Those who survived without being killed were captured and sold into slavery. In 83 CE, Agricola confronted a large Caledonian army led by Calgacus at the Battle of Mons Graupius. According to Tacitus, the Caledonians gathered in great numbers to resist the Roman advance. Agricola placed his auxiliary infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings, and kept the legions behind as a reserve. The battle was fierce, but Roman discipline and organization eventually broke the Caledonian formations. Many warriors escaped into the surrounding hills and forests, but the victory allowed Agricola to claim that the northern tribes had been decisively defeated. After the battle, Agricola continued advancing northward, while the Roman fleet sailed parallel to the army. The expedition reached as far as Cawdor, where the soldiers constructed another fort. These operations represented the deepest known Roman penetration into northern Scotland. A much later story claimed that, after returning to Londinium, Agricola named the territories north of the Forth and Clyde Vespasiana. This claim appeared in a work attributed to antiquity, but actually created in the 18th century by the forger Charles Bertram. The text, known as De Situ Britanniae, was eventually exposed as a fabrication in the 19th century. Although the false account influenced scholars for many years, there is no reliable evidence that Agricola ever used such a name for the conquered north. The Roman victory at Mons Graupius marked the final great phase of the conquest of Britannia. Although resistance did not disappear completely, the empire now controlled nearly all territory south of the Solway Firth and the River Tyne. Once these regions had been brought under military supervision, Rome began transforming conquered tribal lands into an organized provincial system. The native Britons were grouped into administrative districts called civitates, usually based on the territories of the largest existing tribes. Some of these districts were later divided into smaller units as Roman government became more detailed and the population of the province grew. Londinium became the political and commercial heart of Roman Britain. Located beside the River Thames, the settlement developed rapidly because of its excellent position for trade, transport, and communication. In the centuries after Roman rule ended, the Britons remembered it as Caia Lundine. Under Roman authority, however, it became the seat of the provincial administration and one of the most important cities in northwestern Europe. Throughout Britannia, tribal regions were reorganized around urban capitals. The lands of the Atrebates were administered from Caleva Atrebatum, modern Silchester, which later became known to the Britons as Caia Kilemion. The Belgae were governed from Venta Belgarum, today's Winchester, remembered in later British tradition as Cair Gwynthgwaich. The enormous territory of the Brigantes had Isurium Brigantum at Aldborough as one of its most important centres. The Cantiaci were associated with Durovernum Cantiacorum, modern Canterbury, and Durobrivae, modern Rochester. The Carvetii were governed from Luguvalium, present-day Carlisle, while the Catuvellauni were centred on Verulamium, now St. Albans. The Corieltauvi had their principal administrative centre at Ratae Corieltauvorum, modern Leicester. The Cornovi were governed from Viraconium Cornoviorum at Wroxeter, one of the largest and most impressive Roman settlements in Britain. In Western Wales, the Demetei were centred on Moridunum, modern Carmarthen. The Dobuni had Corinium Dobunorum, present-day Cirencester, which became one of the largest towns in Roman Britain. The Dumnoni were associated with Isca Dumnoniorum, modern Exeter, while the Durotriges had important centres at Lendiniae, modern Ilchester, and Durnovaria, modern Dorchester. The Iceni, whose earlier revolt under Boudicca had nearly destroyed Roman power in the province, were governed from Venta Icenorum near modern Castor St. Edmund. The Parisi had their centre at Petuaria near Bro-on-Humber. The Regnenses were administered from Noviomagus Regnensium, modern Chichester, while the Silures were governed from Venta Silurum, modern Caerwent. The Trinovantes were associated with Caesaromagus, modern Chelmsford. These towns became more than political centres. They contained markets, public buildings, shrines, administrative offices, workshops, and roads that connected the surrounding countryside with the wider Roman economy. Alongside these civitas capitals, Rome established 4 major coloniae. These were privileged settlements, usually populated by military veterans and granted special legal status. Colonia Claudia Victricensis at Camulodunum, modern Colchester, had already been founded on the former royal centre of the Trinovantes. Lindum Colonia, modern Lincoln, became another important veteran settlement. Glevum, modern Gloucester, developed into a prosperous colony in the west, while Eboracum, modern York, became one of the most important military and administrative cities in the entire province. Roman Britain also contained many other significant towns, forts, ports, and regional centres. Alona at Alcester controlled routes through the Midlands. Andertitum at Pevensey guarded the southern coast. Aquae Sulis, modern Bath, became famous for its hot springs and the great sanctuary dedicated to Sulis Minerva. Blestium at Monmouth stood near important routes leading into Wales. Castra ad Alaunam at Lancaster served as a military position in the northwest, while Cataractonium at Catterick controlled one of the principal roads leading north. Canovium at Caerhun guarded routes through northern Wales. Danum, modern Doncaster, became an important military and transport centre. Deva Victrix, modern Chester, housed a major legionary fortress. Dubris, modern Dover, served as one of the most important ports linking Britannia with the European continent. Duroliponte, near modern Cambridge, developed beside a major crossing and route. Isca Augusta at Caerleon became the permanent base of Legio II Augusta and one of the strongest Roman positions in Wales. Letotitum controlled the junction of major roads in central Britain. Magnae Dobanorum at Kenchester became an important settlement in the west. Mamutium, modern Manchester, began as a fort and later attracted civilian growth around it. Mediolanum at Whitchurch stood near important regional routes, while Portus Adorni, associated with the Portsmouth area, served the southern coast. Rutupiae at Richborough became one of the main entry points for Roman soldiers and officials arriving from Gaul. Segontium at Caernarfon guarded northwestern Wales, while Sorviodunum near Old Sarum controlled routes through southern Britain. Tamium, associated with modern Cardiff, stood near the southern Welsh coast. Vertis at Worcester, Verulamium at St Albans, and Venovia at Binchester all became part of the extensive network through which Rome governed and supplied the province. At about the same time, Irish tradition remembers the beginning of a major uprising by the Aethiac Tuatha. Although Ireland remained outside direct Roman rule, political struggles continued across the island and were later preserved in legendary and genealogical traditions. In 84 CE, Agricola ordered the commander of the British fleet to sail around the entire island. This expedition had both geographical and political purposes. It demonstrated that Britannia was truly an island, while also displaying Roman naval power along coasts that had never seen large imperial fleets before. The voyage was a clear message to every coastal people. Rome could reach them not only by land, but also by sea. The main headquarters of the Classis Britannica was moved to Dubry, modern Dover, in 85 CE. Its position on the narrowest part of the channel made it ideal for controlling movement between Britain and Gaul. From there, Roman ships could transport troops, carry supplies, escort officials, and watch for raids or rebellion. In 87 CE, Legio II Adiutrix was withdrawn from Britain and transferred to the continent, where it took part in wars against the Dacians. It never returned permanently to Britannia. The removal of such a major force reflected Rome's changing priorities and its belief that the province had become relatively secure. By 88 CE, Legio 20th Valeria Victrix had left its temporary northern positions and established its main base at Deva Victrix, modern Chester. The fortress had recently been vacated by Legio II Adiutrix and offered a strategic location from which Roman forces could supervise northern Wales, the Irish Sea, and the routes leading into the northwest. A mysterious event took place around 117 CE. Legio IX Hispana appears to have marched north toward the highlands and then vanished from the historical record, leaving only limited remnants at Iberacum. The exact fate of the legion remains uncertain. It may have suffered catastrophic losses in Britain, been transferred elsewhere, or been reorganized after heavy casualties. Whatever happened, its disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries of Roman military history. Between 117 and 119 CE, the Brigantes launched a major revolt against imperial authority. They were possibly supported by the Novantae and the Selgovae, peoples living farther north. The uprising was serious enough for Emperor Hadrian to send Quintus Pompeius Falco, an experienced senator and general, to take command of Britannia. By 119 CE, Falco had crushed the rebellion and restored Roman authority. That same year, Hadrian transferred Legio VI Victrix from Germania Inferior to northern Britain. The legion was stationed at Eboracum, where it may have absorbed surviving soldiers from Legio IX Hispana. Hadrian also ordered the production of coins showing the goddess Britannia as the personification of the province. On some of these coins she appeared beneath the Roman eagle, visually expressing the idea that Britain had been subdued by imperial power. Hadrian himself visited Britannia in 122 CE. During this visit, he initiated the construction of the enormous frontier barrier that would later carry his name. He also ordered the creation of a shrine to the goddess Britannia at Eboracum. Unlike the earlier coin image, the sacred representation did not show her humiliated beneath an eagle. Instead, Britannia increasingly became a recognized provincial symbol within the Roman world. During roughly the same period, Irish tradition places Conn Techathach on the high kingship of Ireland. His reign, traditionally dated from 122 to 157 CE, became associated with heroic warfare and the consolidation of dynastic power. Hadrian's Wall was constructed between approximately 122 and 128 CE. It stretched across northern Britain from the mouth of the River Tyne to the Solway Firth. At first, its eastern end was anchored near Ponce Aelius, modern Newcastle, while the western end reached toward Luguvalium, modern Carlisle. The frontier was later extended eastward to Segedunum at Wallsend and westward to Maes at Bowness on Solway. Around 25 forts supported the wall, creating a powerful military system rather than a simple barrier. Soldiers could watch the frontier, control movement, collect information, and respond quickly to raids. Gates allowed regulated travel between Roman territory and the lands beyond. Small forts and towers provided constant observation, while larger bases housed permanent garrisons. Soon afterward, the Romans constructed the Vallum, a vast earthwork running roughly parallel to the southern side of Hadrian's Wall. It consisted of a broad ditch with large banks raised on either side. Causeways and bridges crossed it at selected points. The most widely accepted interpretation is that the zone between the Vallum and the wall formed a controlled military area, particularly during the early years of the frontier. In 139 CE, Emperor Antoninus Pius appointed Quintus Lollius Urbicus as governor of Britannia and ordered him to reconquer the lands north of Hadrian's Wall. Unlike Hadrian, who had preferred a clearly defined defensive frontier, Antoninus sought renewed expansion. By 141 CE, Roman armies crossed Hadrian's Wall and advanced into the southern uplands of modern Scotland. Within a year, much of the region had been subdued. To secure these new gains, Urbicus initiated the construction of another frontier barrier. Built between approximately 143 and 144 CE, the Antonine Wall stretched from the Firth of Forth to the Firth of Clyde. It was shorter than Hadrian's Wall and built mainly from turf rather than stone, but it represented Rome's northernmost permanent frontier in Britain. 11 principal forts were positioned along its length, supported by smaller military installations and roads. In 145 CE, a former governor of Britain, who was serving as governor of Hispania Citerior, was proclaimed emperor under the name Cornelius Priscianus Augustus. His rebellion ended before it could become a major civil war. He committed suicide before being brought before the Senate, and Antoninus Pius prevented a wider investigation, perhaps hoping to avoid uncovering further conspirators. Around 150 CE, Claudius Ptolemy published his great geographical work, which listed many of the peoples known to inhabit the Britannic Isles. Although some names are uncertain or difficult to locate, his work offers one of the most important surviving descriptions of the ethnic geography of Britain and Ireland during the Roman period. In northern Pictavia, beyond the main areas of Roman control, the peoples included the Caireni, Caledoni, Carnonaci, Catti, Cornovi, Creones, Decantes, Epidi, Horesti, Lugi, Smertai, Taexali, Vacomagi, and Venicones. The region between Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine frontier was inhabited by groups such as the Damnoni, Gadeni, Novantai, Selgovi, and Votadini. Northern Britain contained the Brigantes, Carveti, Gabrantoviches, Setanti, Textoverdi, and several smaller communities. The Midlands were dominated by the Cornovi, Corieltauvi, and Parisii. Southern Britain contained a dense collection of peoples, including the Atrebates, Belgae, Cantiaci, Catuvellauni, Iceni, Regnenses, Trinovantes, and several smaller groups remembered under names such as the Ancalites, Bibroci, Cassi, and Senimagni. In the southwestern part of the island, later called West Veahlas by the Saxons, the principal peoples were the Dobuni, Dumnoni, Durotriges, and Lendiniae. Some later writers attempted to prove the existence of a separate Cornovi tribe in Cornwall based on a place name found in the Ravenna cosmography. However, the location connected to that name lies in northeastern Wiltshire, near the roads leading toward Cirencester, Silchester, and Winchester, far from modern Cornwall. The evidence therefore does not strongly support the existence of a distinct pre-Roman Cornish tribe called the Cornovi. The peoples of Wales included the Deciangli, Demetae, Gangani, Ordovizes, and Silures. Medieval Welsh tradition later used names such as Cambria and Deheubarth for parts of the region, but under Roman rule, these communities remained important tribal identities within the province. Ptolemy also listed numerous peoples in Ireland, including the Autini, Brigantes, Cauci, Coriondi, Darini, Eblani, Erdini, Gangani, Iverni, Manapi, Nagnatai, Robogdi, Ustie, Venicni, Volunti, and Velabri. Although Rome never conquered Ireland, ancient geographers knew enough about its coasts and peoples to include it within their descriptions of the Western world. Across the channel in Armorica, the principal tribes included the Osismai, Venetai, Redunes, Curiosolites, and Namnetes. In Galatia, ancient sources referred to a people known as the Arotrebai, sometimes called the Aroni. At this time, the Roman Empire had reached an extraordinary demographic scale. Modern estimates suggest a population somewhere between 65 and 130 million people. Depending on which estimate is accepted, the empire may have contained between roughly 1/5 and 2/5 of the entire world's population, which is thought to have been close to 300 million. Between 155 and 158 CE, another major revolt erupted in Britain, led largely by the Brigantes. The uprising placed such pressure on the Roman army that reinforcements had to be transferred from the Rhine frontier. After the rebellion was crushed, the Brigantes suffered severe punishment. Their monarchy was abolished, and large areas of their territory were taken from them. In 162 CE, the Romans abandoned the Antonine Wall and withdrew south to Hadrian's Wall. The northern frontier had proven difficult and expensive to maintain. Rome, nevertheless, continued to occupy several advanced forts, including Blatobulgium at Birens and Castra Exploratorum at Netherby. These positions among the Selgovi remained active until the final period of Roman rule in Britain. Between 165 and 180 CE, the Antonine Plague devastated the Roman world. Also called the Plague of Galen, it appears to have entered the empire during military operations in Mesopotamia, perhaps during the siege of Seleucia in the Parthian campaign of Lucius Verus. The disease spread rapidly through cities, military camps, roads, and trade networks. Ancient accounts suggest that the plague killed around 10% of the imperial population, although the true number is impossible to determine. Its effects were severe. Military recruitment became more difficult. Agriculture suffered from labor shortages, urban life declined in some areas, and tax revenues weakened. The crisis may also have encouraged the spread of religious movements such as Mithraism, especially among soldiers during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. In 175 CE, Marcus Aurelius stationed approximately 5,500 Sarmatian cavalrymen in Britain. These warriors belonged to the Iazyges, a people recently defeated by Rome. They were organized into a force known as the Cuneus Sarmatarum and settled near Bremetenicum, modern Ribchester in Lancashire. Evidence suggests that descendants or veterans of this community remained in the area into the 5th century. Modern theories have occasionally attempted to connect these Sarmatian cavalrymen with Lucius Artorius Castus and, through him, with the later legends of King Arthur. However, the historical evidence does not establish a direct relationship between Artorius and this particular unit. In 180 CE, the Caledoni crossed south beyond the abandoned Antonine frontier and attacked Roman territory. Their movement also encouraged unrest among the Maiatai. Emperor Commodus responded by sending Lucius Ulpius Marcellus to Britain as governor. Marcellus was known as a strict, disciplined, and often severe commander. By 184 CE, he had carried out a brutal campaign north of the Antonine Wall. His methods, however, angered the Roman soldiers almost as much as they harmed the enemy. The legions rebelled against both Marcellus and Emperor Commodus, complaining of harsh treatment. They attempted to proclaim the former governor, Caerellius Priscus, as emperor, but he refused their offer. The powerful Praetorian prefect Sextus Tigidius Perennis responded by replacing the legionary commanders in Britain. Commodus, meanwhile, adopted the victory title Britannicus, presenting the conflict as another imperial triumph despite the unrest within the army. In 185 CE, Marcellus was removed and replaced by Publius Helvius Pertinax, a highly experienced official and former military tribune of Legio VI Victrix. Pertinax inherited a province whose armies had become politically dangerous and difficult to control. In 186 CE, a Roman deserter named Maternus led a large rebellion known as the War of the Deserters. He gathered soldiers who had abandoned their units, along with criminals and other disaffected people. The rebels overran large parts of Gaul and Hispania, attacking cities and estates while Roman authorities struggled to respond. Commodus sent Gaius Pescennius Niger and Legio Octava Augusta against them. Unable to maintain their position in the western provinces, the rebels escaped into Italy. Maternus then developed an extraordinary plan to assassinate Commodus during a public festival and take control of the empire. Before he could act, however, he was betrayed by his own companions, arrested, and beheaded. According to the historian Cassius Dio, the Antonine Plague returned violently to Rome in 189 CE. He claimed that around 2,000 people died every day and that approximately 1/4 of those infected did not survive. Whether these numbers are exact or exaggerated, they reveal the fear and disruption caused by the renewed epidemic. In 192 CE, Emperor Commodus was assassinated after years of increasingly erratic and authoritarian rule. His death created another dangerous succession crisis. Publius Helvius Pertinax, the former governor of Britain and current urban prefect of Rome, was proclaimed emperor. He took the title Imperator Caesar Publius Helvius Pertinax Augustus, beginning a new and uncertain chapter in the history of the Roman Empire. In 193 CE, the brief reign of Emperor Pertinax came to a violent end after only 87 days. His assassination plunged the Roman world into yet another struggle for supreme power. In the Danubian provinces, Lucius Septimius Severus, commander of Legio XIV Gemina Martia Victrix, was proclaimed emperor by his soldiers in Illyricum and Pannonia. At the same time, the army stationed in Britain and Gaul raised their own governor, Decimus Clodius Albinus, as a rival claimant. Albinus initially chose not to challenge Severus directly. Instead, he supported him against two other competitors for the throne, Didius Julianus in Rome and Pescennius Niger in Syria. This temporary alliance allowed Severus to remove his immediate enemies and strengthen his position across the empire. The arrangement did not last. By 196 CE, Albinus understood that Severus no longer needed him and had ordered his elimination. Faced with almost certain death, he declared himself emperor under the full imperial style of Decimus Clodius Septimius Albinus Augustus, and crossed from Britain into Gaul. What began as an alliance now turned into open civil war. The decisive confrontation came in 197 CE at the Battle of Lugdunum near modern Lyon. The armies of Severus and Albinus fought in one of the largest battles between Roman forces ever recorded. Severus eventually emerged victorious, and Albinus was defeated and killed. His failure had major consequences for Britain because he had withdrawn many troops from the island to support his campaign in Gaul. Roman defenses there had been weakened, and northern peoples quickly took advantage of the situation. Severus appointed Virius Lupus as the new governor of Britannia and reorganized the province by dividing it into two separate administrative regions. The southern province became Britannia Superior, governed from Londinium, while the northern territory became Britannia Inferior, with its center at Eboracum. Both provinces were ruled by imperial governors bearing the title Legatus Augusti pro praetore. The reform was intended to make Britain easier to control, especially after decades of military unrest and political rebellion. When Lupus arrived, he discovered that the Maiatai and the Caledonii had broken their agreements with Rome and resumed raiding the south. The Maiatai appear to have occupied lands near the frontier zone between the two walls, while the Caledonii lived farther north. Lupus lacked enough soldiers to defeat both confederations in open war. Rather than risk a disastrous campaign, he negotiated with the Maiatai and paid them to end their attacks. The solution was humiliating for Rome, but it bought the province time to recover. During the early 3rd century, important political changes were also taking place in Ireland. In the west, the Connachta rose to power and gradually displaced the older Fir Ol Necmachta. Their growing influence was so great that the region itself eventually took their name, becoming Connaught. Northern Britain remained unstable. Between 208 and 211 CE, Emperor Septimius Severus personally led a massive invasion beyond Hadrian's Wall. He brought 3 legions, thousands of imperial guards, cavalry, and a large number of auxiliary troops. His goal was to crush the Caledonii, who had once again entered into conflict with Rome. The Roman army advanced deep into the north and won several engagements, but military victory did not bring lasting control. The Caledonian forces avoided prolonged pitched battles and relied instead on ambushes, raids, difficult terrain, and attacks on Roman supply lines. These guerrilla tactics caused severe losses. At the same time, the Maiate rose again, placing even more pressure on the invading army. Despite the enormous size of his force, Severus eventually withdrew behind Hadrian's Wall. The emperor did not abandon his plans. At Eboracum in 211 CE, he prepared for another northern expedition, determined to continue the war. Before the new campaign could begin, however, he died. His death ended one of the last great Roman attempts to conquer the whole of northern Britain. In 212 CE, his son Caracalla issued one of the most far-reaching legal measures in Roman history. The Constitutio Antoniniana granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free men living within the empire. Free women were also given the legal rights enjoyed by Roman women. Citizenship, once a highly valued privilege limited to certain communities and individuals, now became almost universal throughout the Roman world. The decree helped unify the empire legally, although it also expanded the number of people subject to certain Roman taxes. Around 220 CE, the Yoganakhta dynasty became established in Munster. Over time, this ruling family would dominate much of southern Ireland and play a central role in the political history of the region. Irish tradition dates the reign of Cormac mac Airt as High King of Ireland from approximately 226 to 266 CE. His age is remembered as one of the great heroic periods of Irish legend. Fionn mac Cumhail appears in these traditions as leader of the Fianna Éireann, a famous warrior brotherhood. One legendary episode tells of a Roman landing at the Battle of Ventry, where Fionn and his warriors supposedly repelled an invasion. Although the story belongs largely to heroic literature rather than confirmed history, it reflects an enduring Irish awareness of the power and reputation of Rome. From 235 to 285 CE, the Roman Empire entered the devastating period now called the Crisis of the 3rd century. It began after Emperor Severus Alexander was murdered by his own soldiers. Over the following decades, the empire faced repeated invasions, military revolts, civil wars, economic collapse, inflation, plague, and a rapid succession of short-lived emperors. At several moments, the Roman state appeared close to complete disintegration. The crisis became even more severe when a major epidemic spread through the empire between 249 and 270 CE. Known as the Plague of Cyprian, after Cyprian of Carthage, the disease first became especially destructive in Egypt. Ancient reports claim that the population of Alexandria fell from about 500,000 to fewer than 200,000, although the exact figures remain uncertain. The epidemic had profound social and political consequences. Emperor Decius attempted to restore traditional Roman religion through compulsory public sacrifice, leading to the persecution of Christians in 250 CE. Another major persecution followed under Valerian in 257. Yet these efforts failed to halt the growth of Christianity. By the end of the 3rd century, the religion had expanded rapidly, partly because Christian communities often provided organized care and support during times of illness, insecurity, and social breakdown. The empire also fractured politically. Between 260 and 274 CE, the western provinces were largely separated from Rome under a breakaway state often called the Gallic Empire. It included much of Gaul, both German provinces, Britain, Raetia, and for a time several provinces of Hispania. Although the name Imperium Galliarum is modern, its rulers viewed themselves as legitimate Roman emperors defending the western provinces during a period when the central government could not protect them. At roughly the same time, another independent power arose in the east. Between 260 and 273 CE, the Palmyrene Empire controlled Egypt, Syria, Palestine, and large parts of Anatolia. For a brief period, Rome had effectively broken into 3 competing imperial systems. Despite political instability, Britain experienced noticeable economic development around 260 CE. Roman villas increased in number and size, while towns and villages spread into new regions. Wealthy landowners invested in large rural estates, and agricultural production expanded. This growth suggests that parts of Britannia remained prosperous even while the wider empire faced severe military and political crisis. The year 260 CE brought one of Rome's greatest humiliations. Emperor Valerian was captured alive while fighting the Sasanian Persians. His co-ruler Gallienus was occupied in Pannonia, where the governor Ingenuus had declared himself emperor. Meanwhile, Gallienus's son, Saturninus, supported by the Praetorian prefect Silvanus, was proclaimed emperor at Colonia Agrippinensis, modern Cologne. The governor of Germania Inferior, Marcus Cassianius Latinius Postumus, marched from his base at Colonia Ulpia Traiana with Legio Triginta Ulpia Victrix. He surrounded Cologne, captured Saturninus and Silvanus, and ordered their execution. His own soldiers then proclaimed him emperor. Postumus established his capital at Cologne, already an important provincial center. He described himself as restorer of Gaul and protector of the provinces. Rather than immediately attempting to conquer Italy, he concentrated on defending Britain, Gaul, and the Rhine frontier. His rule created the political structure later remembered as the Gallic Empire, while Gallienus retained control of Rome and Italy. In 265 CE, Gallienus made 2 attempts to overthrow Postumus, but both failed. 3 years later, Gallienus was assassinated and Claudius Gothicus was proclaimed emperor. Claudius succeeded in recovering Gallia Narbonensis and parts of Aquitania, weakening the western breakaway state without destroying it. In 269 CE, another rebellion erupted within the Gallic Empire. Ulpius Cornelius Laelianus, governor of Germania Superior, declared himself emperor at Moguntiacum, modern Mainz. His revolt was dangerous because he controlled Legio 22 Primigenia at Mainz, the headquarters of the Rhine fleet, and Legio 8 Augusta at Argentoratum, modern Strasbourg. Postumus defeated Laelianus and killed him, but his own victory led to his downfall. His troops expected permission to plunder Mainz, and when Postumus refused, they turned against him and murdered him. The soldiers replaced him with Marcus Aurelius Marius, whose reign lasted only a few months. Marius was then overthrown through the actions of Victorinus, commander of the Praetorian troops. Victorinus was proclaimed emperor at Augusta Treverorum, modern Trier. Gaul, Germania, and Britain recognized his authority, but the Spanish provinces returned to the central Roman government. Around 270 CE, Rome began developing and strengthening a chain of coastal defenses that would later become known as the Saxon Shore. These forts grew out of earlier naval bases associated with the classis Britannica. Their original purpose was to patrol the coasts and protect shipping on both sides of the channel. At first, many of the garrisons included Frisians and Franks serving under Roman command. Ironically, the same system later became increasingly important for defense against other seaborne raiders from those regions. The North Sea itself was sometimes called the Mare Frissicum because of the strong Frisian presence along its shores. Victorinus was assassinated in 271 CE. His mother, Victoria, gained temporary control over the army and used her influence to install Tetricus, governor of Aquitania, as emperor. Tetricus moved his capital to Trier and recovered several territories that had been retaken by Claudius Gothicus. The breakaway Western Empire finally ended in 274 CE. Emperor Aurelian defeated Tetricus and his son at the Battle of Chalons, bringing Gaul and Britain back under central Roman rule. Rather than executing Tetricus, Aurelian treated him with unusual mercy and later appointed him governor of Lucania in Italy. The decision demonstrated that political reconciliation could sometimes be more useful than revenge. From 284 CE onward, Roman government entered a new phase usually called the Dominate. The name comes from Emperor Diocletian's insistence on being addressed as Dominus, meaning lord or master. Earlier, emperors had officially presented themselves as first citizens, but the rulers of the Dominate adopted more openly monarchic titles, court ceremonies, and claims of absolute authority. Between 284 and 285 CE, widespread rebellion broke out among the Bagaudae in Gaul and Hispania. Led by Aelianus and Amandus, the movement involved peasants, rural laborers, deserters, and communities resisting heavy taxation, exploitation, and the growing loss of personal freedom. Maximian, then serving as Caesar, crushed the rebellion in late 285 with the assistance of the commander Carausius. Carausius was of Menapian origin and had been born in Gallia Belgica. Because of his naval experience, he was appointed commander of the British fleet. His authority covered both sides of the English Channel, with important bases at Gessoriacum and Dubris. In 285 CE, Diocletian divided imperial responsibility between East and West. He ruled the eastern provinces from Nicomedia, while Maximian governed the western half from Rome. The two men were technically presented as partners, although Diocletian remained the senior emperor. A new western rebellion began in 286 CE. Maximian accused Carausius of keeping captured pirate wealth for himself and ordered his execution. Carausius responded by proclaiming himself emperor in Britain and northern Gaul. He adopted titles such as Restorer of Britain and Genius of Britain, presenting his rule not as rebellion, but as protection from a corrupt central government. His realm included Britain, sections of northern Gaul, Belgica Secunda, Germania Inferior, and the coastal districts later associated with Armorica. He governed from Londinium and Rotomagus, modern Rouen. His strength rested on the three British legions, Legio XXX Ulpia Victrix at Xanten, the British fleet, auxiliary soldiers, and allied barbarian troops. Carausius also issued his own coins and used Roman imperial imagery to justify his authority. His government was stable enough that Maximian's attempt to defeat him in 289 CE ended in failure. Around 290 CE, the coastal fortress of Andertitum was constructed, while other Saxon shore defenses were enlarged and strengthened. These works reflected the growing importance of naval warfare, piracy, and cross-channel control. In 293 CE, Diocletian created a four-part system of government known as the Tetrarchy. Two senior emperors held the title Augustus, while two junior rulers served as Caesars. Constantius Chlorus became Caesar in the west, ruling from Trier, while Galerius governed large eastern territories from Sirmium. Diocletian also moved the western imperial capital from Rome to Mediolanum, modern Milan, and reorganized the provinces into smaller administrative units grouped into 12 dioceses. Constantius immediately focused on destroying the power of Carausius. He besieged and captured the important port of Gessoriacum on the Channel coast. The city was heavily damaged, and Britain was cut off from its continental possessions. Soon afterward, Carausius was murdered by his treasurer Alectus, who took the imperial title for himself. Alectus inherited Britain, but lacked Carausius's authority, military reputation, and political skill. In 296 CE, Roman forces launched a coordinated invasion. The Praetorian prefect Julius Asclepiodotus crossed into Britain with an army, while Constantius supported the campaign from the continent. Alectus was defeated and killed near Caleva Atrebatum, modern Silchester. His remaining territories were restored to the Roman Empire. Gessoriacum was rebuilt and renamed Bononia, the future Boulogne-sur-Mer. During the same broad period, Diocletian introduced major taxation and labor reforms. One of the most important changes was the formal recognition of the colonus adscriptitius. These agricultural workers had once been legally free, but they became permanently tied to the large estates where they lived and worked. They could no longer leave the land freely, creating a system that would later develop into medieval serfdom. The first known use of the name Picti appeared around 297 CE. The word was used by Roman writers for the peoples living north of the formal frontier in Britain, although it may have referred to several different groups rather than a single unified nation. Constantius reorganized Britain once again. The older provinces of Britannia Superior and Britannia Inferior were divided into four smaller provinces, together forming the Diocese of Britain under a vicarius. Britannia. Maxima Caesariensis had its capital at Londinium and covered the heavily populated southeast. Britannia Prima was centered at Corinium and included much of Wales and the southwest. Britannia Secunda was governed from Eboracum and contained much of northern England south of Hadrian's Wall. Britannia Flavia Caesariensis, with its capital at Lindum, covered much of the Midlands. The governor of Britannia Maxima held the senior rank of consularis, while the other provinces were ruled by officials called presides. None of these civilian governors directly controlled troops. Military and civilian authority had been deliberately separated to reduce the chance that another provincial governor could use an army to seize imperial power. Londinium, which served as both the diocesan capital and the capital of Britannia Maxima, was officially renamed Augusta Britanniarum. The new title never became widely popular, and the older name continued to be used. Military command in the Diocese of Britain was divided among three senior officers. The Count of the Maritime District controlled Legio to Augusta, now stationed at Rutupiae, along with several thousand frontier infantry and cavalry. He supervised coastal defense on both sides of the Channel and also commanded the Classis Britannica, based at Dubri and Bononia. The Duke of the Britons commanded Legio Sexta Victrix at Eboracum and a much larger body of frontier troops, especially along the northern defenses. The Count of Britain, also known as the Count of Military Affairs throughout the Britons, commanded Legio Vicesima Valeria Victrix at Deva Victrix, along with mobile field troops who could be sent rapidly to areas of danger. The Rhine fleet, the Classis Germanica, operated from Xanten and later Cologne. Its main duty was patrolling the Rhine, but it also watched the river mouth and nearby North Sea coastline under commanders based in Gaul. The same reforms reorganized Gaul into two dioceses. The Diocese of Gaul included several provinces of Lugdunensis, Belgica, Germania, and the territory of the Sequani. The Diocese of Viennensis, also called the Seven Provinces, contained Aquitania, Narbonensis, Viennensis, and the Alpine provinces. Hispania was also restructured. The former three provinces became five: Tarraconensis, Galaecia, Lusitania, Baetica, and Carthaginensis. These were further divided into judicial and administrative districts known as conventus, serving a role similar to the civitates found in other parts of the empire. During the early 4th century, the Uí Néill, a branch of the Connachta, moved northward into western and northern Ulster. Their expansion would eventually transform the political balance of Ireland and create one of its most powerful dynastic groupings. Between 305 and 306 CE, Constantius, now senior emperor in the west, crossed beyond Hadrian's Wall and campaigned in the lowlands north of the abandoned Antonine frontier. His son Constantine accompanied him and gained valuable military experience during the expedition. Constantius died at Iberacum in 306 CE. His soldiers immediately proclaimed his son emperor under the name Flavius Valerius Constantinus Augustus. He would later become known as Constantine the Great, one of the most influential rulers in Roman history. His proclamation began a long series of civil wars among the surviving rulers of the Tetrarchy. These conflicts lasted until 324 CE, when Constantine finally defeated his rivals and became the sole ruler of the empire. By 313 CE, the original political balance of the Tetrarchy had effectively collapsed. Constantine emerged as the dominant Augustus, although the administrative system of smaller provinces grouped into dioceses remained in place. The growing importance of Christianity in Britain became visible in 314 CE. 3 British bishops attended the Council of Arles: Eborius of York, Restitutus of London, and Adelphius of Caerleon. Their presence proves that organized Christian communities with recognized bishops already existed in Roman Britain by the early 4th century. The council was held mainly to condemn Donatism, a movement that had divided the churches of North Africa. The participation of British clergy shows how closely the province had become connected to religious debates taking place across the empire. In 315 CE, Constantine adopted or renewed the victory title Britannicus Maximus, linking himself with military success in Britain and presenting his dynasty as the protector of the province. In 325 CE, Constantine convened the First Council of Nicaea. At this time, he still used religious titles associated with the unconquered son, reflecting the gradual and complex nature of his relationship with Christianity. The council brought bishops together from across the empire to resolve major disputes within the church. It supported the Trinitarian position associated with Athanasius, condemned Arianism, established a method for determining the date of Easter, and issued the original Nicene Creed. It also confirmed the high status of the churches of Alexandria and Antioch and elevated Jerusalem to metropolitan rank, separating it from the older authority of Caesarea Maritima. In Irish tradition, Cyril mac Cairbre, known as Colla Uais, became High King of Ireland but was overthrown in 326 CE by Muiredac Tirech. Colla Uais and his brothers, Colla Men and Colla da Crish, were expelled to Alba with a following of approximately 300 warriors. In 330 CE, Constantine founded a new imperial capital on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. He called it Nova Roma, though it soon became universally known as Constantinople. Located between Europe and Asia, the city controlled major sea routes and became the senior capital of the Roman Empire. A year later, according to Irish tradition, the 3 Collas returned from exile. They defeated the last Uleid High King of Ulster, destroyed the ancient royal centre of Emain Macha, and established the kingdom of Argiala. The Uleid were pushed back into the northeastern corner of their former territory, permanently changing the political map of Northern Ireland. In 335, Emperor Constantine ordered the First Synod of Tyre to examine a series of accusations brought against Athanasius, the influential bishop of Alexandria. The council was led by Eusebius of Caesarea, and after lengthy debates, Athanasius was found guilty. Refusing to accept the decision, he traveled to Constantinople and appealed directly to the emperor. Constantine dismissed nearly all of the accusations, but one remaining charge proved serious enough to remove Athanasius from office. His exile temporarily strengthened the Arian movement, which regained much of the influence it had previously lost. When Constantine died in 337, the Roman Empire was divided among his three sons. The western provinces, including Gaul, Britain, Spain, and Germany, were assigned to Constantine II. Italy, the Balkans, and North Africa passed to Constans, while Constantius II ruled the eastern provinces stretching from Thrace and Anatolia to Syria and Egypt. Each region was supervised by a praetorian prefect responsible for civil government, while Rome and Constantinople each retained their own prefect. Military authority remained separate from civil administration, creating a more organized imperial structure. Only a few years later, in 340, Constantine II attempted to seize Italy from his younger brother Constans. The campaign ended in disaster when Constantine was killed in an ambush, allowing Constans to absorb his brother's western territories. Around 343, Constant personally visited Britain, possibly leading a brief military expedition despite traveling with only a small escort. During the same period, bishops from Britain attended the Council of Serdica, an important gathering intended to settle the growing dispute over Arianism, although lasting agreement remained out of reach. By 347, Roman authorities established a colony of Frisian settlers in Britain, creating a community that later became known as Cair Paris, or Dunfries. A few years afterward, the empire entered another period of civil war. In 350, Magnus Magnentius, a respected commander of the Imperial Guard whose family combined British and Frankish ancestry, overthrew the deeply unpopular Emperor Constans and declared himself emperor. His rebellion quickly gained the support of Britain, Gaul, Spain, Germany, Italy, and Africa, and even received recognition from the Roman Senate. Only Constantius II in the east refused to acknowledge his claim. The struggle between the rivals reached its climax in 351 at the Battle of Mursa Major, one of the bloodiest civil wars in Roman history. Although Constantius emerged victorious, the enormous loss of life made the victory painfully expensive. Magnentius attempted to negotiate during the following year, even offering to serve merely as an officer under Constantius, but his proposals were rejected. As more of his legions abandoned him, Constantius strengthened the Rhine frontier by appointing the Romanized Frankish general Silvanus to restore order and defend northern Gaul against Germanic attacks and renewed Bargaudae uprisings. Some historians believe that between 354 and 358, Britain may even have witnessed the brief rule of an otherwise unknown imperial claimant, sometimes called Carausius II, whose existence has been suggested by a small number of coins discovered at Richborough. During these same years, Paulus Catina became associated with several political purges, including the downfall of Constantius Gallus. In 355, another crisis erupted when Silvanus, falsely accused of plotting against the emperor, was proclaimed emperor by his own troops at Cologne. His reign lasted only a few weeks before he was assassinated, after which Catina once again pursued suspected supporters with relentless determination. Administrative reforms continued throughout the empire. A separate prefecture of Illyricum was established in 356, dividing responsibilities that had previously belonged to the Italian administration. Beyond the imperial frontiers, new regional kingdoms also appeared, including the early Irish kingdom that later became known as Uí Main. In 358, the future Emperor Julian defeated the Salian Franks, but allowed them to remain inside imperial territory as protected communities on the condition that they supplied soldiers to defend the frontier. Religious controversy continued to shape imperial politics. In 359, British bishops participated in the Council of Rimini, while Eastern bishops met at Seleucia in another attempt to resolve the divisions created by Arianism. Neither gathering fully restored unity. Around the same time, Paulus Catena was dispatched to the eastern provinces to investigate suspected traitors and suppress opponents of the imperial-backed bishop in Alexandria. From 360 to 363, the empire came under the rule of Julian, later remembered as Julian the Apostate because he sought to revive traditional Roman paganism after decades of Christian imperial policy. His reign coincided with renewed raids by the Picts and the Scots into Britain. After Julian's death, many officials connected with the previous persecutions, including Paulus Catina, were executed for their abuses of power. Meanwhile, an even greater challenge was emerging beyond Rome's borders. Beginning in 363, the Huns expanded rapidly across the Eurasian steppe into the northern Balkans. Their advance forced the Alans, Goths, and many other peoples to migrate westward, creating a chain reaction that would transform the political map of Europe. At the same time, Britain continued to suffer repeated attacks by the Picts, Saxons, Scots, and Attacoti, exposing the growing weakness of Roman frontier defenses. Under Emperor Jovian, Christian policy became considerably stricter. Pagan religious practices were increasingly suppressed, severe penalties were introduced for traditional ceremonies, and non-Christians were barred from commanding Roman troops. Although his reign was short, these decisions further accelerated the empire's transformation into an officially Christian state. The crisis deepened dramatically in 367 during what later became known as the Great Conspiracy. Picts, Attacoti, Scots, and Frankish raiders launched coordinated attacks against Roman Britain and northern Gaul, while sections of Hadrian's Wall garrison revolted alongside local frontier forces. Large parts of northern and western Britain fell into chaos. Several senior Roman commanders were either killed or captured, while the usurper Valentinus attempted to exploit the confusion by launching his own revolt. Emperor Valentinian I, occupied by wars against the Alemanni, dispatched a succession of trusted generals to restore order. Although the empire eventually recovered control, the campaign exposed how vulnerable Roman Britain had become after decades of internal conflict, religious division, and continuous pressure from enemies both within and beyond the imperial frontier. After the Great Conspiracy, Roman authority in Britain was restored through the efforts of the experienced General Flavius Theodosius, who had recently been appointed military commander of the province. Accompanied by his young son, the future Emperor Theodosius I, and the capable officer Magnus Maximus, he assembled his forces at Bononia before crossing into Britain. The Roman army successfully drove back the invading Picts, Scots, Saxons, and Attacoti, crushed the rebellion led by Valentinus, and reorganized the province. Theodosius abolished the unreliable frontier intelligence network known as the Ariani and introduced a stronger administration by appointing Civilis as Vicar of Britain and Dulcitius as commander of its military forces. Around the same period, Roman authorities also began relocating Brittonic troops to Armorica in northern Gaul to strengthen the coastal defenses against increasing pirate attacks. By 369, the northern frontier was reorganized once again with the creation of a new province known as Britannia Valentia. Although historians continue to debate its exact location, it represented Rome's determination to restore order after years of instability. Only a few years later, Emperor Valentinian I settled groups of Alemanni inside Britain as federate allies, allowing them to defend imperial territory while remaining loyal to Rome. During the 370s, dramatic events unfolded across both Britain and the wider empire. The Huns continued expanding westward under their rising leaders, while in Ireland, the powerful Uí Níl dynasty began its long ascent toward dominance. Niall of the Nine Hostages emerged as one of the most famous early Irish rulers, and his descendants would influence Irish politics for centuries. At the same time, Christianity gained even greater influence within the Roman world. Bishop Ambrose persuaded Emperor Gratian to abandon the ancient pagan title of Pontifex Maximus, while the Bishop of Rome gradually assumed greater religious authority, marking another important step in the development of the medieval papacy. In 380, Magnus Maximus became commander of the Roman forces in Britain. That same year, the Edict of Thessalonica declared Nicene Christianity to be the official religion of the Roman Empire, ending centuries of religious uncertainty. 1 year later, the Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople reaffirmed Orthodox Christian doctrine, condemned several competing beliefs, and strengthened the position of the Imperial Church while recognizing Constantinople as second only to Rome in ecclesiastical importance. Britain soon faced another series of attacks. In 382, fresh waves of Pictish, Scottish, and Saxon raiders struck the province. After restoring order, Maximus reorganized the northern frontier by placing trusted commanders over several frontier regions. Medieval Welsh traditions later claimed that many local royal families traced their ancestry back to these Roman military governors, illustrating how Roman administration gradually blended with emerging British kingdoms. A turning point arrived in 383 when the British legions proclaimed Magnus Maximus emperor. Frustrated with Emperor Gratian's leadership and his preference for foreign troops, the soldiers supported Maximus as their new ruler. Crossing into Gaul with much of Britain's professional army, Maximus quickly defeated Gratian after many imperial forces deserted to his side. Establishing his capital at Trier, he gained control over Britain, Gaul, Spain, Germany, and eventually Africa. Even the Eastern Emperor reluctantly accepted his position for a time. According to later British and Breton traditions, this period also saw large groups of Britons migrate to Armorica under the legendary Conan Meriadoc, laying the foundations for what would become Brittany. Maximus continued to strengthen his rule over the following years. He established military settlements in northwestern Spain that later evolved into important Brittonic communities, while also becoming deeply involved in religious affairs. The execution of the Christian teacher Priscillian on charges of heresy became one of the earliest examples of the imperial government putting a Christian to death over doctrine. His later invasion of Italy temporarily forced the young Emperor Valentinian II from power, but the success proved short-lived. In 388, Emperor Theodosius marched west, defeated Maximus, captured him at Aquileia, and ordered his execution, ending Britain's most successful imperial rebellion. The decades that followed witnessed an even more dramatic transformation of the Roman world. Emperor Theodosius launched an aggressive campaign against traditional pagan religion. Ancient temples were closed, sacrifices were outlawed, the sacred fire of Vesta was extinguished, the Vestal Virgins were dissolved, and the famous Serapeum at Alexandria was destroyed by a Christian mob. During the same period, the great intellectual center associated with the Library of Alexandria suffered devastating destruction, symbolizing the end of one of the ancient world's greatest centers of learning. By 395, the Roman Empire experienced its final and permanent division following the death of Theodosius. The Eastern and Western empires would never again be united under one emperor. Britain remained part of the Western Roman Empire, but its military command was increasingly focused on defending the vulnerable Saxon shore against growing seaborne raids. Across the English Channel, new defensive districts were established along the coasts of Gaul, reflecting Rome's growing concern over attacks from both pirates and migrating peoples. At almost the same moment, the Huns reached the lands north of the Black Sea, beginning the chain of invasions that would soon reshape Europe. During the final years of the 4th century, the powerful general Stilicho attempted to preserve the weakening Western Empire. Although he never personally campaigned in Britain, he reinforced the province with additional troops, strengthened frontier defenses, and repaired Hadrian's Wall. His government also crushed a rebellion in North Africa led by Gildo, preserving one of Rome's most valuable grain-producing regions. Around this period, several Irish and other Federate communities were settled in western Britain, while Breton traditions remembered Conan Meriadoc as the founder of Brittany across the Channel. The opening years of the 5th century revealed just how fragile Roman power had become. Ireland entered what many historians describe as its cultural golden age, with learning, literature, and religious scholarship flourishing. Niall of the Nine Hostages rose to become the dominant High King, while Britain itself struggled to maintain its defenses. Hadrian's Wall underwent further repairs, yet the growing Gothic threat forced Stilicho to withdraw experienced troops from Britain in order to defend Italy. Emperor Honorius abandoned Milan and established his capital at the more secure city of Ravenna, a decision that clearly demonstrated how the empire's priorities had shifted. As Rome concentrated on survival closer to its heartlands, Britain found itself increasingly isolated, setting the stage for the eventual end of Roman rule on the island only a few years later. By the beginning of the 5th century, Roman Britain faced growing pressure from every direction. In 405, waves of Picts, Scots, and Saxon raiders once again struck the island's coasts and northern frontiers. At the same time, the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriata began expanding into western Scotland as changing political conditions in Ireland pushed its people across the sea. In Ireland itself, the famous High King Niall of the Nine Hostages died, leaving behind a powerful dynasty that would dominate Irish politics for generations. Meanwhile, on the European mainland, the relentless advance of the Huns forced entire nations to abandon their homelands. Goths, Vandals, Alans, and many other tribes poured into Roman territory, creating one of the greatest migration movements in European history. One of these armies, led by the Gothic king Radagaisus, invaded Italy but was crushed by the brilliant Roman general Stilicho in 406 before it could threaten the empire's heartland. The same year brought another crisis to Britain. Frustrated by the empire's inability to defend the province, the Roman legions stationed there rebelled. They first proclaimed Marcus as emperor, only to murder him a few months later and replace him with Gratian. His rule also proved short-lived, and the soldiers soon elevated Constantine III, believing he was the leader capable of saving both Britain and the Western Empire. Constantine immediately crossed into Gaul with much of Britain's professional army, hoping to restore order and establish himself as the legitimate emperor. At almost exactly the same moment, Vandals, Suebi, and Alans crossed the frozen Rhine River in one of the most devastating invasions the Western Roman Empire had ever faced. The frontier that had protected Gaul for centuries effectively collapsed overnight. In 408, disaster struck the empire once again. Stilicho, Rome's greatest military commander, became the victim of political conspiracies. Accused of plotting against the imperial family, he was executed along with his son. His death removed the last commander truly capable of defending the Western Empire. Soon afterward, thousands of barbarian families living peacefully in Italy were massacred. Their surviving husbands and fathers fled to Alaric, king of the Visigoths, greatly strengthening his army. Alaric marched on Rome and surrounded the city several times, while imperial authority continued to weaken across the western provinces. The years that followed were marked by rebellion and invasion. Large areas of Gaul fell into chaos as peasant uprisings known as the Bagaudae spread through the countryside. Vandals, Suebi, and Alans overran much of Hispania, while Saxon pirates launched increasingly frequent attacks on the shores of Britain and Armorica. Constantine III gradually lost control as local governors abandoned him, and even his own general, Gerontius, revolted in support of another rival emperor in Spain. Britain, isolated from the imperial government, was increasingly forced to defend itself. The year 410 became one of the most famous in Roman history. After several unsuccessful attempts, Alaric and the Visigoths finally entered Rome and spent 3 days plundering the Eternal City. It was the first time in nearly 8 centuries that Rome had fallen to a foreign army, sending shockwaves throughout the ancient world. Around the same period, Roman authority in Britain continued to disappear. Powerful local rulers began establishing independent kingdoms across the island. Colhen emerged as a dominant figure in the north, while the kingdoms that later became Strathclyde and Gwent started taking shape. Irish settlers established themselves in parts of western Britain, and some of the earliest permanent Anglo-Saxon communities appeared near the Thames estuary. Although it was once widely believed that Emperor Honorius officially abandoned Britain during this period, modern historians generally agree that the famous imperial order was actually directed to communities in southern Italy rather than Britain itself. Constantine III's ambitions came to an end in 411 when he was defeated, captured at Arles, and executed. His supporters quickly proclaimed another emperor, Jovinus, while the Burgundians established their first kingdom along the Rhine frontier. In Hispania, the invading Germanic tribes divided the peninsula among themselves. The Suebi settled in the northwest, while the Vandals and Alans occupied much of the south and central regions. Roman influence survived only in a few isolated provinces. Over the next several years, however, the Visigoths fought on behalf of Rome, crushing the Siling Vandals and severely weakening the Alans before receiving lands in Aquitaine as Federate allies. Their settlement marked the beginning of the Visigothic kingdom, one of the first major successor states to emerge from the declining Western Roman Empire. Religious conflict also continued to reshape the empire. Pelagian Christianity gained widespread support in Britain, Ireland, and parts of Gaul, despite being condemned by church leaders in Rome. In 415, one of antiquity's greatest philosophers, Hypatia of Alexandria, was brutally murdered by a fanatical mob, an event that has long symbolized the fading intellectual traditions of the classical world. During these same years, pagan temples were closed across the empire as Christianity became firmly established as Rome's dominant religion. By the early 420s, Roman Britain had entered its final chapter. Following the death of Cole Hen, northern Britain fragmented into several smaller Brittonic kingdoms that would shape the political landscape of the coming centuries. In Ireland, new kingdoms such as Ailic and Tir Conile rose to prominence under descendants of Niall of the Nine Hostages. Around the same time, the future St. Patrick was born, while Vortigern emerged as one of Britain's most influential political leaders during the collapse of Roman authority. Across the Channel, the gifted general Flavius Aetius rose to command Roman forces in Gaul, but even his remarkable military skill could only slow the empire's decline. Armorica slipped further from imperial control, local revolts became more common, and Visigothic attacks intensified. Although the Western Roman Empire still officially claimed Britain, its authority had become little more than a memory, and a completely new era was about to begin. Around the early 5th century, one of the most valuable records of the late Roman Empire, the Notitia Dignitatum, was compiled. Although parts of it reflected an earlier period, it offered a remarkably detailed picture of how Roman Britain was still supposed to function between roughly 410 and 420. The document outlined both the civil administration and the military organization of the province, revealing that, despite the empire's weakening control, an impressive administrative system officially remained in place. At the head of Roman Britain stood the Vicarius Britanniarum, the emperor's highest civil representative on the island. Working under the Praetorian prefect of Gaul, the Vicarius supervised taxation, legal affairs, government records, correspondence, and provincial administration through a large staff of assistants, financial officers, archivists, clerks, and secretaries. Below him were the governors of Britain's provinces, each supported by their own administrative officials who handled local government, justice, and taxation. According to the Notitia Dignitatum, Britain was divided into at least 5 major provinces, including Britannia Prima, Britannia Secunda, Britannia Maxima Caesariensis, Britannia Flavia Caesariensis, and Britannia Valentia. Some later writers even suggested the existence of an additional province covering the Orkney Islands. The military structure was just as carefully organized. By this period, the Roman army had changed considerably from the massive legions of earlier centuries. Instead of 5,000-man legions, most field legions now consisted of roughly 1,000 professional soldiers supported by cavalry and specialized auxiliary units. Smaller formations such as numeri, cohorts, and cavalry wings were stationed across Britain to respond quickly to raids and local uprisings. Overall command of the mobile field army belonged to the Comes Britanniarum, one of the empire's most senior military officers. Under his leadership served elite infantry formations, heavily armored cavalry, mounted archers, and mercenary horsemen recruited from many different parts of the empire. These highly trained troops formed the strategic reserve, ready to reinforce threatened frontiers or suppress rebellions wherever they appeared. Protecting Britain's southeastern coastline was another important commander, the Count of the Saxon Shore. His responsibility was defending the vulnerable coast against increasing attacks by Saxon pirates and raiders crossing the North Sea. Powerful forts stretched from Norfolk through Kent and down to Hampshire, including major strongholds at Richborough, Dover, Reculver, Lympne, Burgh Castle, Brancaster, Pevensey, and Portchester. These fortresses were linked by naval patrols operated by the Roman fleet, creating a defensive network designed to detect and intercept enemy ships before they could reach Britain's interior. Farther north, responsibility passed to the Dux Britanniarum, commander of the frontier armies stationed along Hadrian's Wall and northern Britain. From his headquarters, he oversaw dozens of garrisons stretching across the entire frontier. Famous forts such as Segedunum, Vindolanda, Chesters, Housesteads, Burdeswald, Caribur, and Maryport remained occupied by Roman infantry, cavalry, engineers, scouts, and specialized frontier troops. Each fortress played a specific role in guarding roads, monitoring enemy movements, and protecting the empire from raids launched by the Picts and other northern peoples. Western Britain also continued to maintain important military positions. Strongholds such as Caerleon, Chester, Caerwent, Cardiff, Wroxeter, and Saguntium remained active well into the late 4th and early 5th centuries. Some were still occupied even after direct Roman administration had begun disappearing, suggesting that local Romano-British leaders inherited and continued using these strategic fortifications long after imperial officials had departed. Across the English Channel, Roman defenses formed a coordinated system with Britain. Separate military districts guarded the coasts of Armorica and northern Gaul, maintaining fleets, cavalry units, and frontier garrisons that worked closely with the Saxon Shore Command. Their mission was to defend the Atlantic and Channel coastlines from piracy, migration, and invasion, while preserving communication between Britain and the continent. These continental commands protected important ports throughout Normandy, Brittany, Picardy, and the lower Somme region, where Roman soldiers, cavalry, and naval forces remained on constant alert. Although the Notitia Dignitatum presents an image of a highly organized and disciplined military machine, reality was becoming very different. Many of the units listed in the document had probably been reduced in strength, relocated, or existed only on paper by the early 5th century. Even so, the document remains an extraordinary record of Rome's final military organization in Britain. It captures the last moment when the empire still claimed to govern the island through a vast network of governors, frontier commanders, professional soldiers, cavalry regiments, naval squadrons, and fortified bases. Within only a few decades, much of this remarkable system would disappear, giving way to the independent Brittonic kingdoms and the emerging Anglo-Saxon settlements that would shape the next chapter of Britain's history. By the late 420s, Roman Britain stood largely on its own. In 427, British leaders appealed to the powerful Roman commander Aetius for military assistance against constant attacks from the Picts and Scots, but the empire was overwhelmed by crises elsewhere and could offer little help. Forced to rely on their own resources, the Britons recruited Germanic Federate warriors and settled them in southern Britain to strengthen local defenses. Around the same time, Ireland's High King Dathi died during a campaign on the continent, marking the end of the era of Ireland's great warrior kings. Religious disputes also shaped this period. The teachings of Pelagius continued spreading across Britain, prompting Pope Celestine I to send bishops Germanus of Auxerre and Lupus of Troyes to restore Orthodox Christianity. Besides preaching, Germanus also helped organize the Britons against invading raiders, combining military leadership with religious authority. Meanwhile, the brilliant Roman general Aetius rose to become the empire's leading military commander as he fought to preserve Roman power against enemies on every frontier. Throughout the 430s, the Western Roman Empire struggled to survive. The Vandals abandoned Spain under their ambitious king Genseric and crossed into North Africa, eventually capturing Carthage and creating one of the strongest barbarian kingdoms in the Mediterranean. At the same time, the Visigoths repeatedly invaded southern Gaul, while revolts by the Bagaudae weakened Roman control in Armorica. Although Aetius defeated several enemies with the help of Hunnic mercenaries, the empire increasingly depended on alliances rather than its own strength. In Britain, political fragmentation accelerated. Local rulers gained greater independence, and conflicts erupted between native Brittonic kingdoms and Irish settlers who had established themselves in western regions. According to later tradition, Vortigern emerged as Britain's leading ruler during this difficult period, attempting to unite the island against growing external threats. Around the same time, Irish legal traditions were formally organized into written codes, reflecting the growing sophistication of Irish society. The situation became even more desperate during the 400s and 40s. Britain suffered repeated invasions, famine, civil conflict, and outbreaks of disease. Many Romano-British communities abandoned the eastern lowlands and migrated toward the safer western regions. New kingdoms gradually appeared around former Roman cities such as London and Winchester, while Germanic Federate settlements became increasingly powerful. Despite repeated appeals for help, Aetius could spare no troops, as he was fully occupied confronting Attila the Hun and defending the collapsing Western Empire. Around 446, the desperate Britons sent what later became famous as the Groans of the Britons, pleading with Aetius for military assistance. No substantial Roman army ever arrived. Instead, Germanus returned to Britain once more, encouraging resistance against the Picts and Scots while supporting the island's Christian communities. During these years, St. Patrick also began his mission in Ireland, establishing churches that would transform the religious history of the island. A decisive turning point came in 450 when Vortigern invited the Jutish leaders Hengist and Horsa to Britain as mercenary allies. Arriving with only a few ships, they were granted land in return for defending the island against northern enemies. What began as a military alliance soon evolved into permanent settlement. More Germanic warriors followed, while the Britons gradually realized that their new allies had ambitions far beyond military service. At the same time, important Brittonic kingdoms continued to emerge. Reged expanded across much of northern Britain, while large numbers of Britons migrated across the Channel into Armorica. Their settlement became so significant that the region gradually became known as Brittany, or Little Britain, preserving its British cultural identity for centuries. The wider Roman world faced equally dramatic events. In 451, Aetius joined forces with the Visigoths to defeat Attila the Hun at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, one of the most important victories in late Roman history. That same year, the Council of Chalcedon defined key Christian doctrines and reshaped the structure of the early church. Yet even these successes could not stop the empire's decline. Relations between the Britons and the Germanic settlers rapidly deteriorated. Vortigern strengthened his alliance by marrying Hengist's daughter, but additional waves of Jutes soon arrived from northern Europe. At the same time, Cunedda led his followers into northwestern Wales, driving back Irish settlers and establishing the Kingdom of Gwynedd, one of the most influential Welsh kingdoms of the early medieval period. The crisis deepened after the assassination of Aetius in 454. Without Rome's greatest general, the Western Empire lost its strongest defender. Only a year later, Emperor Valentinian III was also murdered, while the Vandals crossed into Italy and brutally sacked Rome. Imperial authority collapsed even further as emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, each controlling less territory than the last. Britain experienced the same instability. Battles between Vortimer and Hengist became increasingly fierce, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Eastern Kent gradually fell under Jutish control, forcing many Britons farther west. Despite temporary Roman victories in Gaul under generals such as Aegidius and Majorian, imperial influence in Britain had effectively disappeared.